This 4-year-old homeless girl says to a millionaire, "He made me do time on the corn all night long." What he does next will shock you. Comment what you think will happen. Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. Your help is very important. The harsh July sun beat down on Harmony Park in downtown Willow Creek when Arthur Davenport spotted the small, huddled figure near the old water fountain. At 52, the businessman had developed a habit of walking through the park before opening his artisanal pottery studio, a routine that helped him organize his thoughts for another day of work. But on this Wednesday morning, something different caught his eye. The girl couldn't have been more than 6 years old. She was sitting on the cold ground, her legs bent in an awkward way, as if protecting something precious against her chest. Her brown hair was disheveled, stuck to her face with tears that seemed to have dried hours ago. Her clothes, a faded pink dress and a brown jacket too big for her small frame, were dirty with dirt and what appeared to be dried mud. Arthur slowed his pace, observing discreetly. The child was holding something in her small hands, clutching it tightly against her body. When she moved slightly to wipe her nose on her jacket sleeve, he could see they were kernels of dried corn, some still with bits of the cob attached. "Good morning, little one," said Arthur, approaching carefully and crouching down at a respectful distance. His naturally deep voice sounded even softer when he spoke to children, though such occasions were rare. The girl looked up, startled. Her eyes were big and dark, filled with a sadness that shouldn't exist in a child so young. For a moment, she looked ready to run, but something in Arthur's calm posture made her stay where she was. "No need to be afraid," he continued, keeping his voice low and quiet. "I just wanted to know if you're okay. Are you hurt?" The simple question caused fresh tears to begin streaming down the girl's dirty face. She shook her head, but her hands tightened even more around the kernels of corn. "What's your name?" Arthur tried again. "Isabel," she whispered, her voice so quiet that he had to lean in to hear. "Isabel is a very pretty name. I'm Arthur. Do you live around here?" The girl pointed vaguely in the direction of the road that led to the farms on the outskirts of town, but said nothing else. Arthur noticed that she was avoiding putting her full weight on her knees, staying in an uncomfortable position that looked painful. "Isabel, can I ask why you're holding that corn?" The simple question provoked an intense reaction. The girl's eyes widened in fear, and she began to speak rapidly, the words coming out in a desperate whisper. "He made me do time on the corn all night long. My knees hurt so bad. I didn't want to, but he said I was disobedient because I didn't sweep the yard good enough. I stayed there until the sun came up, and now it hurts real bad." Arthur felt a chill run down his spine. Each word the child spoke was like a punch to the gut, but he struggled to keep his expression calm, knowing that any sign of shock could frighten her even more. "Who is he, Isabel?" he asked carefully. "Mr. Barnaby. He takes care of me since I don't have anyone else," she replied, lowering her eyes. Arthur knew Barnaby Ferreira by sight. He was a middle-aged man who worked as a caretaker on a nearby farm and had a reputation for being hard-working and reliable. He'd never imagined that anyone could make a child kneel on corn kernels as punishment. "Did you run away from home?" he asked softly. "Not really run away," said Isabel, hesitantly. "He left for work and said I could go to the park, but I have to be back before he gets home from the farm. If I'm not there—" She didn't finish the sentence, but the fear in her eyes said it all. Arthur looked around the park, which was beginning to fill with people going to work and children on their way to school. How was it possible that a situation like this was happening right in the center of town, and no one knew anything about it? "Isabel, have you told anyone about these punishments?" "Who would I tell?" she replied, genuinely confused. "Mr. Barnaby always says that no one else wants me. that he's the only one who felt sorry for me, and that if I tell lies about him to people, they'll send me away and I won't have anywhere to live. The child's explanation revealed a psychological manipulation that left Arthur even more disturbed. He realized he needed to act with extreme caution. One wrong move could put Isabel in even greater danger. "Listen, Isabel," he said, taking a business card from his pocket and writing something on the back. "This is my name and where I work. It's very close from here, just around the corner. If you need help for any reason, you can come and find me, no matter what time it is." The girl took the card with trembling hands, looking at the words as if trying to memorize each letter. "But now you need to go back so you don't get in trouble, right?" said Arthur, though each word cost him a piece of his soul. Isabel nodded sadly, standing up with difficulty. Arthur noticed that she grimaced in pain as she put weight on her knees. Without thinking twice, he took the handkerchief from his pocket and gently wiped the girl's dirty face. "It's going to be okay," he said, though he didn't know if he was making a promise he could keep. As he watched Isabel walk away along the dirt road, limping slightly, Arthur felt something awaken inside him that he hadn't felt in a long time. It was a mixture of anger, protectiveness, and determination that transformed that ordinary morning into the most important of his life. He didn't know it yet, but meeting Isabel in that park would mark the beginning of a journey that would test every fiber of his character and force him to question everything he believed about his hometown. All that morning, Arthur couldn't concentrate on anything but the image of Isabel, huddled in the park. Sitting in his office at the pottery studio, he stared blankly at the production reports without really seeing the numbers. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the girl's frightened face again and heard her whispering words about spending the night kneeling on corn kernels. Around 10 o'clock, he made an impulsive decision. He picked up the phone and called Valerie Macmillan, a social worker at City Hall and one of the few people he trusted in town. He had known Valerie for almost 15 years, ever since she had arrived fresh out of college to work in the municipality's social programs. "Valerie, I need to talk to you about a delicate situation," he said when she answered. "Arthur, what a surprise. What's wrong? You sound worried." "It's about a child, a girl named Isabel who lives with a man named Barnaby Ferreira. Are you familiar with the case?" The silence on the other end of the line lasted too long to be natural. When Valerie finally answered, her voice sounded strangely cautious. "Why are you asking about this, Arthur?" "I found the girl this morning in Harmony Park, crying and telling me things, disturbing things, about physical punishments that aren't normal for a 6-year-old. "Arthur, listen," said Valerie, her voice becoming firmer. "I know you have good intentions, but there are protocols that need to be followed. We can't just interfere in people's lives based on people's lives," Arthur interrupted. "Valerie, we're talking about a child who spent the entire night kneeling on corn kernels as punishment. That's not discipline, it's torture." "Things aren't always as they seem, Arthur. Barnaby is a respected man in the community. He's worked on Mr. Thompson's farm for over 10 years. If there was something really wrong, someone would have reported it already." Valerie's resistance disconcerted Arthur. He had hoped to find an ally, someone who shared his concern for the child's well-being. Instead, he found someone who seemed determined to downplay the situation. "Valerie, do you know this girl personally?" I've heard about the case. But Arthur, you need to understand that we can't act based only on—" "So you admit that you know the case," he pressed. "What do you know about her?" "Look, I really can't discuss details of specific cases over the phone. If you have legitimate concerns, you need to file a formal report through the proper channels." Arthur hung up the phone, frustrated and confused. Valerie's reaction didn't make sense. In all the years he had known her, She had always shown genuine concern for children at risk. Why was she being so evasive now? He decided he needed more information before making any decisions. He called his administrative assistant and asked her to cancel his afternoon appointments. He wanted to learn more about Isabel's situation before deciding how to proceed. Around 2 o'clock, Arthur drove to the farm where Barnaby worked. Mr. Thompson's property was about 15 miles from downtown, in an area of rolling hills covered with pastures and small farms. It was a prosperous rural area, known for its corn production and dairy farming. He found Barnaby Ferreira working on repairing a fence near the road. He was a tall, thin man, about 45 years old, with greying hair and hands calloused from hard work. He was wearing a plaid flannel shirt and a straw hat worn by the sun. "Good afternoon," greeted Arthur, getting out of the car. Barnaby looked up from his work, evaluating the visitor with some strangeness. Arthur was not known to frequent the rural areas of the city. "Good afternoon. What can I do for you?" "My name is Arthur Davenport. I have the pottery studio downtown." "Oh, I know the name. You make those pretty things that sell at the fair, right?" "Exactly. Actually, I came here because of a girl. I heard you take care of a child named Isabel." The change in Barnaby's expression was subtle, but Arthur noticed it. The muscles around his eyes tightened slightly, and he gripped the hammer he was holding a little harder than necessary. "Isabel is my responsibility, yes." "Why, are you asking? I found her this morning at Harmony Park, looking kind of lost. I was worried." "Lost?" Barnaby frowned. "She had permission to go to the park. I always tell her not to talk to strangers, but sometimes kids don't listen. She seemed to be in pain, in her knees." Barnaby let out a laugh that sounded forced. "That rascal. Last night she fell in the yard playing in the dark after I told her not to go out. She hurt her knees, but it wasn't anything serious. Kids get hurt all the time, don't they?" The explanation seemed rehearsed, and Arthur realized that Barnaby was avoiding direct eye contact as he spoke. "Have you been taking care of her for a long time?" "A few years. Her mother had problems. She couldn't take care of the girl properly. When she couldn't take care of her anymore, I ended up taking responsibility. Someone had to do it. And the father never showed up. Isabel has no one else in the world besides me." There was something in the way Barnaby spoke about the situation that bothered Arthur. It was as if he were reciting a carefully constructed version of the facts. "It must be difficult taking care of a child alone," commented Arthur, trying a friendlier approach. "Yee, but we manage. Isabel is a good girl. She just needs discipline sometimes. Kids today don't respect adults like they used to." "What kind of discipline?" The question seemed to make Barnaby slightly uncomfortable. He went back to hammering nails into the fence with more force than necessary. "Nothing much. No TV, go to bed early, sometimes have to help with extra chores in the yard. Normal things that any parent does." Arthur noticed that he hadn't mentioned the punishments involving kneeling on corn, but decided not to push it further at that moment. "Well, I wanted to offer help," he said, changing his strategy. "If you need anything for the girl, clothes, school supplies, some financial support." Barnaby's reaction was immediate and defensive. "I don't need anyone's charity. I can take care of Isabel very well on my own. She doesn't lack anything." "I wasn't suggesting she did. I just wanted—" "Look here," Barnaby interrupted, dropping the hammer and turning completely to Arthur. "I don't know what ideas that girl put in your head, but every family has their own methods of discipline. Isabel is my responsibility, and I know what's best for her. I appreciate the concern, but I don't need outside interference." His tone of voice had become clearly hostile, and Arthur realized that any further insistence could further harm Isabel's situation. "Of course, I understand perfectly," he said, backing away. "I just wanted to make it clear that if you need anything, you can count on me." Barnaby nodded curtly, but his eyes remained distrustful as he watched Arthur return to his car and drive away. During the drive back to town, Arthur reflected on the conversation. There was something fundamentally wrong with that situation, but he still couldn't quite identify what it was. Barnaby's hostility to the offer of help had been disproportionate, and his version of Isabel's injuries clearly contradicted what the girl herself had said. Even more disturbing was Valerie's reaction. Why would an experienced social worker be so reluctant to investigate a situation involving possible child abuse? As he parked in front of his studio, Arthur made a decision that would change the course of everything. No matter how many obstacles he encountered, he would find out the truth about Isabel and do everything in his power to protect her. The E. Next morning, Arthur woke up with a determination he hadn't felt in years. After a restless night, filled with nightmares of a crying child, he had made a decision. He needed to know more about Isabel's situation, and that meant talking to other people who might have information about her. His first stop was Willow Creek Elementary School, where Isabel was supposedly attending. The brick building with blue-trimmed windows was only 3 blocks from his studio. On a tree-lined street, he passed every day on his way to work, but one he had never paid much attention to. The principal, a grey-haired woman with glasses, greeted him courteously, but when he mentioned Isabel's name, her expression changed visibly. "Isabel Ferreira?" she asked, consulting some papers on her desk. "Yes, she's enrolled here, but to be honest, she's one of our biggest concerns." "Why?" "Attendance. The girl misses a lot of school. When she does show up, she's always wearing clothes that are inappropriate for her age or too dirty, and she has a behavior, how can I put it, very withdrawn for a 6-year-old. Arthur felt his heart race. "How often does she miss school?" "In the last 3 months she's been here maybe 15 days, always with excuses from the guardian, claiming she was sick or had family commitments." "And you never investigated?" The principal sighed deeply. "Mr. Davenport, we've tried several times to contact Mr. Barnaby to discuss the situation. He always promises it will get better, but nothing changes. We even reported the case to the City Hall Social Services." "And what happened?" "We were told that the case was being monitored and that we shouldn't worry more than necessary, that Isabel's situation was temporary and would be resolved soon." Arthur frowned. Once again, social services seemed to be downplaying the girl's situation. "Can I speak with her teacher?" "Of course. Florence Sanders is the one who teaches Isabel's class. She's in class now, but you can talk to her during recess." Arthur waited in the teacher's lounge until a young brunette with long hair and expressive eyes appeared at the door. Florence Sanders looked to be about 29 years old and was carrying a stack of children's notebooks under her arm. "The principal said you wanted to talk about Isabel," she said, sitting down at the table next to him. "May I ask what your interest is in the situation?" "I found her crying yesterday in Harmony Park. I was worried about what she told me." Florence looked around the room to make sure they were alone, then leaned forward and lowered her voice. "Mr. Davenport, can I trust you? Because there are things about Isabel that have worried me for months, but I'm afraid to speak." "You can trust me completely. Isabel isn't just a child with attendance problems. When she comes to school, she shows clear signs of abuse. Not just physical, but psychological as well." "What kind of signs?" "She gets startled by any sudden movement. If someone raises their voice, even if it's not at her, Isabel flinches as if she's going to be hit. Several times I've found her in the bathroom crying silently. But when I ask what happened, she says she can't tell because no one will believe her anyway." Arthur felt a growing anger burning in his chest. "And you've never been able to get her to talk about what happens at home?" "Once she said something that chilled me to the bone," Florence paused, as if it was still difficult to repeat. I was teaching about plants in science class, talking about how corn grows. Isabel started to cry and said she hated corn because it hurt too much to be on it. When I asked what she meant, she clammed up completely and didn't say anything else the rest of the day. My God! There are other things too. Isabel always brings her own lunch, but it's always the same thing. A stale piece of bread and sometimes a very overripe fruit. The other children have more elaborate lunches, but she never complains. It's as if she's used to having less than others. Florence opened one of the notebooks she was carrying and showed it to Arthur. The pages were filled with children's drawings, but they weren't the colourful and cheerful drawings typical of a 6-year-old. These are some of the drawings Isabel has done during art class. Arthur examined the pages with growing horror. All the drawings showed the same scene, a small figure kneeling on the floor, surrounded by small dots that clearly represented kernels. In some drawings, there was a larger, threatening figure standing next to the child. She always draws the same thing, explained Florence. When I ask about the drawings, she says she's showing the punishment. I've tried to talk to her about other forms of art, other themes, but she always goes back to these images. And you reported this? Of course I did. I took the drawings to the principal, who sent them to social services. The response we received was that children's drawings are not sufficient evidence and that children have fertile imaginations. Arthur shook his head in disbelief. How can they ignore such obvious signs? Mr. Davenport, can I tell you something that might sound like a conspiracy theory, but I swear it's true? Florence looked around the room again. I have the impression that someone is deliberately protecting Barnaby Ferreira. Every time we've tried to take the concerns about Isabel further, we've encountered resistance or been discouraged from continuing to investigate. What kind of resistance? The principal was called to a meeting at City Hall 2 months ago and came out of there saying that we shouldn't get involved in matters we don't fully understand. I myself received a phone call from someone at social services advising me to focus on teaching and leave social problems to the competent professionals. Arthur processed this information with growing indignation. It was becoming clear that there was something much more complex going on than simply a man mistreating a child. Florence, do you know Barnaby Ferreira personally? Only by sight. He's a cousin of the owner of the Central Bakery, Mr. Johnson. I've also heard that he's worked for the Thompson family for many years. They are influential people in town. And do you have any idea how Isabel came to be in his care? That's the strangest part, said Florence, lowering her voice even further. I started investigating on my own, going through old school records. Isabel first appeared in our files about 3 years ago, but not as a normal transfer. It was as if she had simply appeared out of nowhere. What do you mean? There are no records of where she studied before, no transfer documents from another school. There isn't even a previous address in the files. It's as if she didn't exist before she came here. Arthur felt a chill run down his spine. And is that normal? Absolutely not. Every child leaves a trace in the educational systems. Even children who move from other cities or states have some kind of school history. Isabel has nothing. 0. The bell rang, indicating the end of recess, and Florence began to gather her materials. Mr. Davenport, can I ask you a favor? If you're really interested in helping Isabel, you need to be very careful. I have the feeling that stirring up this situation could be dangerous. Dangerous how? I don't know exactly, but a teacher who worked here before me, named Connie, asked too many questions about a similar situation involving another child. She was transferred to a school in the rural area overnight, without explanation, and when I tried to contact her afterwards, I found out that she had left town completely. Florence got up to return to the classroom, but before leaving, she turned to Arthur once more. "There's one thing you should know. Isabel isn't the only child in town living in questionable situations. During my 3 years working here, I've identified at least 4 other children with similar signs, all under the care of different people, but all with the same characteristics: irregular school attendance, signs of neglect, resistance from social services to investigate." 4 other children? And all connected in some way to people who have local influence. It's as if there's a pattern, but no one wants to admit it exists. When Florence left, Arthur remained seated in the teacher's lounge for several minutes, trying to process everything he had heard. What had begun as concern for one specific child was revealing itself to be something much bigger and more sinister. He thought about Valerie's reluctance to investigate the case, Barnaby's hostility to the offer of help, and now Florence's revelations about a possible pattern of institutional neglect. One thing was becoming clear: saving Isabel wouldn't simply be a matter of reporting a situation of abuse. It would be necessary to confront a system that seemed deliberately designed to protect the responsible adults and ignore the suffering of the children. In the days that followed, Arthur found himself obsessively watching Harmony Park during his morning walks, hoping to find Isabel again. His routine had changed completely since his first meeting with the girl. He arrived at work earlier, left later, and began taking different routes through the city, always hoping to run into her. It was on a rainy Thursday, exactly 1 week after his first encounter with Isabel, that he saw her again. This time she wasn't alone in the park. A tall, elegant woman wearing expensive business clothes was crouched next to the girl, talking in a low voice. Arthur immediately recognized Carmela Villela, his administrative assistant for over 5 years. Intrigued, he observed from a distance. Carmela seemed to be giving Isabel some kind of instruction, who was shaking her head vigorously, as if agreeing or promising something. The conversation lasted only a few minutes, but there was an intimacy in the interaction that surprised. "Arthur, how did Carmela know Isabel?" When Carmela walked away in the opposite direction, Arthur quickly approached the girl. Isabel was sitting in the same spot where he had found her the week before, but this time she wasn't crying. Instead, she seemed to be waiting for something. "Hi, Isabel," he said softly. "Do you remember me?" The girl's eyes lit up slightly. "Yes, you gave me your card. I've kept it safe." "That's good. And who was that lady who was talking to you?" The question made Isabel look uncomfortable. She looked around nervously before answering. "Ms. Carmela. She always talks to me when she sees me around here. Always. Have you known each other for a long time?" Since I've lived with Mr. Barnaby. She sometimes visits him. They talk about grown-up things." Arthur felt a strange pang in his stomach. Carmela visited Barnaby? Why had she never mentioned that? And more importantly, why was she talking secretly with Isabel in the park? "What did you talk about today?" Isabel hesitated, biting her lower lip. She asked if anyone else had talked to me here in the park. If anyone had asked questions. "About Mr. Barnaby." Arthur's blood ran cold. "And what did you answer?" "That you were nice to me and gave me your card. But she said it wasn't good to talk to strangers, that it could cause problems for me." "What kind of problems?" "She said that if I told wrong things about Mr. Barnaby to other people, he could get very angry with me. And that important people in town wouldn't like it." Arthur struggled to keep his voice calm, although inside he felt a growing fury. "Isabel, did you tell her about the punishments? About kneeling on the corn?" The girl shook her head quickly. "No! I promised Mr. Barnaby that I wouldn't tell those things to anyone. I only told you because you seemed different." "Different how?" "I can't explain. You didn't seem angry with me." At that moment, Arthur realized that Isabel was trembling slightly, even though it wasn't particularly cold. He took off his jacket and put it over the girl's shoulders. "Isabel, can I ask you an important question? How long have you lived with Barnaby? A long time, since I was very little. Do you remember living with other people before? With your mother, maybe? Isabel's face closed up completely, and she began to rock slightly back and forth, a behavior that Arthur recognized as a defense mechanism. I can't talk about that, she whispered. Mr. Barnaby says that if I talk about before, the bad people will find me and take me away to a much worse place. What bad people? I don't know. He just says they exist and that only he can protect me from them. Arthur felt his outrage grow with each word. Barnaby was clearly using fear and psychological manipulation to keep Isabel under control. Isabel, would you like not to have to kneel on the corn as punishment anymore? The question made the girl's eyes fill with tears. Of course I would. It hurts a lot and sometimes I'm there all night. But Mr. Barnaby says it's so I can learn to be obedient. What if I told you that there are people who can help, people who can make it so you don't have to go through that anymore? Can you really do that? She asked, her voice filled with desperate hope. Before Arthur could answer, he heard footsteps approaching quickly. He turned and saw Barnaby Ferreira walking towards them with an angry expression on his face. Isabel, what are you doing here? Didn't I tell you to stay home? The transformation in the girl was instantaneous. She flinched visibly, quickly, took off Arthur's jacket and stood up with abrupt movements. Sorry, Mr. Barnaby, I just came to get something I forgot. What thing? You didn't have anything to forget here. Barnaby approached even closer and Arthur could see that his fists were clenched. The girl recoiled instinctively. And you, said Barnaby, turning to Arthur, didn't I say I didn't need your interference? Why are you filling the girl's head with nonsense? I wasn't filling her head with anything, replied Arthur, struggling to keep his voice controlled. Just talking. Talking about what? About things that are none of your business. About the well-being of a child who is clearly suffering. The statement made Barnaby take a threatening step towards Arthur. Are you accusing me of something? I'm saying that a 6-year-old shouldn't be afraid to talk to adults, shouldn't know about punishments that involve physical pain, and she definitely shouldn't be missing school constantly. Who told you she misses school? Arthur realized. He had revealed too much information. Anyone can check school attendance records, Barnaby. It's no secret. Look here, you busybody, said Barnaby, his voice becoming dangerously low. I don't know what game you're playing, but I'm going to give you some advice. Stop sticking your nose where it doesn't belong. Isabel is my responsibility, and I decide what's best for her. If you keep hassling me, you'll regret it. The threat was clear and direct. Arthur looked at Isabel, who was trembling visibly and looking at the ground. Isabel, said Barnaby, his voice still rough. Let's go. Now. Yes, sir, she mumbled, starting to walk away. And the next time someone comes to talk to you, you come and tell me immediately. Got it? Got it. As he watched Barnaby lead Isabel away, holding her arm more tightly than necessary, Arthur made a decision that would change everything. No matter the threats, no matter how many people were involved in protecting Barnaby, he was going to find out the truth about Isabel and do something to help her. But first, he needed to have a very serious conversation with Carmela Villela. Back at the studio, Arthur found Carmela organizing papers on her desk, apparently focused on her work. She looked up when she saw him enter, smiling as she always did. Good afternoon, Arthur. How was your morning? Interesting, he replied, sitting down in the chair in front of her desk. I ran into little Isabel in the park again. He carefully watched Carmela's reaction. For a fraction of a second, he saw a flicker of something. Surprise? Fear? Flash across her eyes before she regained her composure. Oh, really? The little girl you mentioned yesterday? Exactly. And she told me something interesting. She said you always talk to her when you see her there. This time, Carmela couldn't completely hide her reaction. Her hands stopped shuffling the papers, and she looked directly at Arthur with an expression he had never seen before. Arthur, I think you're getting involved in things you don't fully understand. Then explain it to me. Help me understand why my administrative assistant is having secret conversations with a child who is clearly being mistreated. Things aren't always as they seem, said Carmela, echoing exactly the words that Valerie had used. Sometimes it's better not to ask too many questions. Carmela, we've worked together for 5 years. I've always trusted you. Now I'm asking you to trust me too. What's happening with Isabel? Carmela was silent for a long moment, clearly struggling with some internal decision. Finally, she sighed deeply. Arthur, you need to stop asking questions. About that girl, for your own good, my own good. There are people in this town who aren't going to like knowing that you're getting involved in this situation, people who can cause problems for you and your business. The veiled threat chilled Arthur to the bone. His own employee, someone he had trusted for years, was essentially threatening him to stop trying to help a child in danger. The tension between Arthur and Carmela remained palpable in the days that followed. She continued to perform her administrative tasks efficiently, but avoided prolonged conversations and no longer made direct eye contact as she used to. Arthur, in turn, began to question everything he had shared with her in recent years, wondering how much other information she might be passing on. It was during this period of growing distrust that Arthur decided to seek outside help. If he couldn't trust the people close to him, he would need to find someone from outside the local circle who could advise him on how to proceed. The following Tuesday, he drove to Santa Barbara, the neighboring city, where he consulted a lawyer specializing in child rights. Dr. Robert Myers greeted him in his modern office, listening attentively as Arthur recounted everything he had discovered about Isabel. Mr. Davenport, the lawyer said when Arthur finished, what you're describing are clear signs of abuse and neglect, but there are some complex legal aspects that we need to consider. What aspects? First, you mentioned that Barnaby Ferreira has informal custody of the child. This means that there may not be adequate legal documentation establishing his parental rights. If that's the case, the situation is even more irregular than it seems. Arthur leaned forward. And is that good or bad for Isabel? It can be both. If he doesn't have formal legal guardianship, it will be easier to remove her from his custody, but it also means that we don't know who the legitimate guardians of the child are, or where they are. And how do we find that out? We would need to access birth records, certificates, possible previous custody proceedings, but that requires court authorization or cooperation from local authorities. The local authorities are exactly the problem, explained Arthur, telling him about Valerie's resistance and Carmela's strange behavior. Dr. Myers made careful notes as he listened. That suggests there may be a local protection scheme, possibly involving corruption or political favoritism. Unfortunately, it's more common than we'd like to admit in smaller towns. What can I do? Legally, you have a few options. You can file a formal complaint with the district attorney's office, which has the authority to investigate independently of local authorities. You can also document everything you observe and seek more concrete evidence. What kind of evidence? Photographs of the child's injuries, if possible. Recordings of relevant conversations, witnesses who can confirm the pattern of behavior, medical records, if they exist. Arthur felt a weight on his shoulders. Does that mean I essentially need to spy on the situation? It means you need to be strategic. But remember, any evidence obtained illegally cannot be used in legal proceedings. Everything must be done within the law. When he returned to Willow Creek, Arthur was determined to follow the lawyer's advice. He began carrying a small, discreet camera and recorder, hoping for opportunities to document Isabel's situation without violating the law. The first opportunity arose during the city's traditional craft fair, held on the last Wednesday of January. The event took place monthly in Harmony Park, with stalls selling local products, handicrafts, and typical foods. Arthur set up a small booth to display some of his pottery pieces, but his real goal was to observe. Around 3 in the afternoon, he saw Isabel approaching the fair. She was walking slowly, carrying a straw basket full of corn cobs. Her clothes were clean, but clearly too old for her size, and she seemed too tired for a 6-year-old. Arthur watched her discreetly as she headed to one of the food stalls. The lady who ran the stall greeted her familiarly. "Hi, Isabel. Did you bring Mr. Barnaby's corn?" "Yes, Mrs. Davis. He said there are 20 cobs today." "Great, dear. Here's the money." Arthur saw the woman hand some coins to Isabel, who carefully put them in a small cloth bag. It was then that he noticed something that made his blood run cold. The girl's hands were clearly injured, with small cuts and scratches that suggested heavy manual labor. When Isabel walked away from the stall, Arthur discreetly followed her. She stopped at 2 other points in the fair, always delivering agricultural products and receiving money in return. It was obvious that she was working, selling products that she had helped harvest or process. It was when she was returning from the fair that Arthur saw Barnaby approaching. Isabel's reaction was immediate and disturbing. She began to run, not towards him, but hiding behind the stalls of cooked corn, exactly as Florence had mentioned. "Isabel, where are you?" shouted Barnaby, his voice echoing through the square. The girl remained hidden behind the stall, trembling visibly. Arthur managed to position himself to have a clear view of the scene and began recording discreetly. "I know you're there," continued Barnaby, his tone becoming more threatening. "You better show yourself now, or it's going to be worse when we get home." Reluctantly, Isabel came out of her hiding place. Even from a distance, Arthur could see that she was crying. "Why were you hiding?" asked Barnaby when she approached. "I wasn't hiding, Mr. Barnaby. I was just looking at the corn." "Liar," he said, grabbing her arm tightly. "Did you sell everything okay? Didn't lose any money like last time?" "No, sir. It's all here." Isabel handed over the bag of coins, and Barnaby carefully examined it before pocketing it. "Good. Now let's go. You still have to help with the watering before dark." As he watched Barnaby lead Isabel away, Arthur felt a mixture of anger and determination. He had managed to document clear evidence of child labor and abusive behavior, but he had also noticed something more disturbing: the way other people at the fair watched the interaction between Barnaby and Isabel without showing any concern or surprise. It was as if everyone knew what was happening, but no one cared enough to intervene. That night, Arthur reviewed the recordings at his home. The material was disturbing, but he still wasn't sure if it would be enough for legal action. He decided he needed more evidence and, above all, he needed to better understand the network of people who seemed to be protecting Barnaby. It was then that he made a risky decision. The next morning, he would make an unannounced visit to the farm where Barnaby worked, this time to talk directly to the owner, Mr. Thompson. If there was a protection scheme involving influential people in the city, perhaps Barnaby's own boss could give him some answers. Or at the very least, Arthur could assess the level of knowledge and complicity of the farmer in the situation. But what he didn't know was that Carmela had reported his recent activities to people who had no interest in seeing Isabel protected, and that his visit to Mr. Thompson would be carefully watched by eyes that didn't want the truth about the girl to come to light. On Friday morning, as Arthur drove towards the farm, he was being followed discreetly by a car that kept enough distance not to be noticed. Inside the vehicle, 2 people were discussing how to deal with the businessman who was becoming a bigger problem than they had anticipated. "He's not going to give up easily," said a female voice. "Then we'll have to make things more persuasive." replied a male voice. "There are ways to make people stop asking inconvenient questions." Arthur, unaware of the danger that was approaching, continued driving towards what he believed would be an enlightening conversation with the farmer. He didn't imagine that he was about to discover that Isabel's situation was just the tip of a much larger and more dangerous iceberg than he had ever imagined. Mr. Thompson's farm was one of the most prosperous properties in the area, with green pastures stretching for acres and an imposing white manor house with blue trim. Arthur parked near the main gate and walked towards the house, observing the farm workers tending to the dairy cattle in the nearby pastures. Richard Thompson was a man of about 65 years old, completely white hair and an erect posture that betrayed decades of work in the field. He received Arthur on the porch of the manor house, offering strong coffee and cheese bread made by his wife. "Mr. Davenport, it's an honor to receive you here," said Thompson, gesturing for him to sit in a wooden chair. "I know your work in pottery, very respected in the region." "Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Actually, I came here to talk about one of your employees, Barnaby Ferreira." The change in the farmer's expression was almost imperceptible, but Arthur noticed it. The muscles around his eyes tightened slightly. "Barnaby is an excellent employee. He's worked for me for over 10 years, a trustworthy, dedicated man." "Why are you asking about him?" "It's about the child he takes care of, Isabel." "Ah, yes, his niece, isn't she?" "Poor thing, she was orphaned very young." Arthur frowned. "Niece? Barnaby told me there was no kinship between them." Thompson seemed momentarily confused, then gave a forced laugh. "Well, maybe I got confused. You know how it is in a small town. Everyone becomes related, right? The important thing is that Barnaby took care of the girl when she needed it most." "Mr. Thompson, have you ever noticed anything inappropriate in the way Barnaby treats Isabel?" "Inappropriate how?" "The girl shows signs of physical abuse. She misses a lot of school. She seems to have excessive fear of adults." The farmer placed his cup of coffee on the table more forcefully than necessary. "Mr. Davenport, with all due respect, I think you're seeing problems where they don't exist. Barnaby may be strict in education, like any man of our generation, but I've never seen anything to suggest, well, what you're implying." "What about child labor? Today I saw Isabel selling products at the fair, clearly working to contribute to the family income." "Teaching a child to have responsibilities isn't a crime," replied Thompson, his tone becoming more defensive. "In my time, all children help their parents with small chores. It makes them more responsible people." Arthur realized he wasn't getting anywhere with this approach. He decided to change his strategy. "Mr. Thompson, do you know the story of how Isabel came to be in Barnaby's care?" "I do, yes. The girl's mother had problems. She couldn't take care of her properly. When the situation became unsustainable, Barnaby offered to take responsibility. It was a noble gesture on his part." "What kind of problems?" "Drugs, if you know what I mean. The woman was an addict. She couldn't raise a child." "And where is that woman now?" Thompson hesitated. "She died. Overdose, from what I heard. It was a tragedy." "And the father of Isabel?" "He never showed up. The girl was completely orphaned." There was something in the way Thompson told the story that bothered Arthur. It seemed too rehearsed, as if it had been repeated many times to different people. "Mr. Thompson, can I ask a more direct question? Are you sure that Isabel's situation is legal? I mean, is there formal documentation of the guardianship?" The question made the farmer stand up abruptly from his chair. "Look here, Mr. Davenport. I don't know what game you're playing, but I'm going to give you some advice. Stop asking questions that are none of your business. I'm concerned about the well-being of a child. And I'm concerned about the reputation of an exemplary employee who is being persecuted by unfounded insinuations." Thompson's tone had become clearly hostile. Barnaby told me that you've been bothering the girl in the park. That can be interpreted in very unpleasant ways. The veiled threat made Arthur feel a chill down his spine. I'm not bothering anyone. I'm trying to help a child who is clearly suffering. You know what I think? Said Thompson, approaching Arthur with an intimidating expression. I think you should focus on your own business. I heard your studio has been facing some financial challenges lately. Arthur stood up too. What do you mean by that? Cancelled contracts, dissatisfied customers. These things happen when a person doesn't stay focused on their work. The implication was clear. There was a connection between his investigations into Isabel and the recent problems at his business. Are you threatening me, Mr. Thompson? I'm giving you friendly advice. In a small town, reputation is everything, and men who make serious accusations without proof end up losing credibility and business. Arthur left the farm with more questions than answers. The conversation had confirmed his suspicions that there was a protection scheme around Barnaby, but it had also revealed that this scheme had enough reach to affect his own business. During the drive back to town, he reflected on the inconsistencies in the story told by Thompson. First, Barnaby had said that he had no kinship with Isabel. Then, Thompson had mentioned that she was Barnaby's niece, only to contradict himself later, and the story about the addicted mother seemed too convenient. When he arrived at the studio, he found a scene that confirmed his worst fears. 3 of his main clients were gathered in the office, all with serious expressions. Michael Peterson, owner of a home decor store in Santa Barbara, was the first to speak. Arthur, we need to talk about our contracts. What's wrong? Certain concerns about the personal conduct of your studio have come to our attention. We've received information that you may be involved in inappropriate activities involving minors. Arthur felt the world spin around him. That's completely false. Who said such a thing? The source is reliable, said Ann Carter, owner of a crafts boutique. And unfortunately, we can't risk associating our businesses with someone who is under suspicion. What suspicion? I've never done anything inappropriate with any child. I heard you've been harassing a little girl in Harmony Park, said the third client, Robert Smith. That you've been approaching her repeatedly against the guardian's will. Arthur realized that the situation had been completely distorted. His attempt to help Isabel was being presented as predatory behavior. That's a complete manipulation of the facts, he said, struggling to keep his voice controlled. I'm trying to protect a child who is being mistreated. Maybe that's true, said Michael, but we can't take any risks. We're cancelling our orders, and we recommend that you resolve this situation quickly before it spreads even further, added Anne. When the clients left, Arthur sat down in his chair, trying to process what had happened. In less than 2 weeks, his attempt to help Isabel had resulted in the loss of a large part of his clientele and direct attacks on his reputation. Carmela entered the office a few minutes later, carrying a stack of invoices with a worried expression. Arthur, we need to talk about the company's financial situation. With the cancellation of these contracts... I know, he interrupted. We're in trouble. More than you imagine, she said, spreading the papers on the table. If we don't get new clients quickly, we'll have to lay off employees, maybe even close temporarily. Arthur looked at Carmela, remembering her secret conversations with Isabel and her warnings about important people who wouldn't like his interference. Carmela, do you know anything about these cancellations? What do you mean? Do you know if someone contacted our clients spreading false information about me? Carmela looked away. Arthur, I warned you that you should stop getting involved in this situation. Important people don't like interference. So you knew this was going to happen. I knew you were taking unnecessary risks. At that moment, Arthur understood the extent of the problem he faced. He wasn't just fighting to save Isabel, he was fighting against a system that was willing to destroy his personal and professional life to protect its secrets. But instead of discouraging him, this realization only strengthened his determination. If they were willing to go so far to silence him, it meant there was much more to discover about Isabel's situation than he had initially imagined. The following days were among the most difficult of Arthur's professional life. The news about the misconduct spread quickly through the small town, and he began to notice suspicious glances when he walked down the streets. Conversations stopped abruptly when he approached, and some old acquaintances began to avoid him completely. At the studio, the atmosphere was tense. Two of his longest-serving employees resigned, claiming they had received better offers at other companies, but Arthur suspected the real reason was fear of being associated with him. Production had decreased dramatically, and new orders simply stopped arriving. It was during this dark phase that he received an unexpected visit. Florence Sanders appeared at the studio on a Monday morning with a worried expression on her face and a folder of documents under her arm. "Mr. Davenport, we need to talk urgently," she said, looking nervously around the office. "Of course, Florence, what happened?" "It's about Isabel, and about other children too." She opened the folder and spread several papers on the table. They were school records, attendance reports, and personal notes written by hand. After our last conversation, I decided to investigate more deeply. What I discovered is much worse than we imagined. Tell me everything. I started by analyzing the school records of the 4 children I mentioned before, the ones who show similar patterns to Isabel. They all have a few things in common. They appeared in the educational system irregularly, without a clear previous history. They all live with guardians who aren't direct relatives, and they all show signs of neglect or abuse. Florence pointed to one of the records. "This is Mary, 7 years old. She lives with Anthony Cooper, who works at City Hall. This is Julia, 8 years old, who is with Sebastian Miller, owner of a small grocery store. And this is Laura, 5 years old, who lives with Connie Baker, a widow who receives a generous pension. And what do these people have in common? They're all politically or economically connected to influential people in town. Anthony is the vice mayor's cousin. Sebastian supplies food for the municipal school lunch program. Connie is the local police chief's sister-in-law." Arthur studied the documents with growing horror. "Are you suggesting there's an organized network?" "More than that. I think I've discovered how the scheme works." Florence took a map of the region and several old newspaper clippings from the folder. About 5 years ago, there was a series of reports about the closure of an illegal shelter in a neighboring city. The place was being investigated for abuse and administrative irregularities. When it closed, about 20 children were redistributed to families in the region. "And you think Isabel and the others came from that shelter?" "I don't just think so. I'm almost certain. I found a photo of the group of children who were transferred." She showed a yellowed newspaper clipping. The photo was of poor quality, but it showed a group of small children, all with frightened expressions and inappropriate clothing. "This girl here," said Florence, pointing to a small figure in the corner of the photo, "has hair and physical structure very similar to the current Isabel, and the age would match perfectly." Arthur examined the photo carefully. It was difficult to be sure, but there was a disturbing resemblance. "But if that's true, it means Isabel isn't an orphan, as Barnaby claims. She may have family somewhere." "Exactly, and that's why I need to show you one more thing." Florence took from the folder a copy of an official document that appeared to have been photocopied secretly. "I got access to the birth records archived at City Hall. Isabel has a birth certificate, but there are irregularities in it. The mother's name appears as Margaret Sanders, but there's no information about the father. And the registered address is for a house that was demolished more than 10 years ago. Sanders, Arthur noticed the last name. Like you? Florence became visibly uncomfortable. Yes, it's a common last name in the region. Many families here have that name. But it may be too much of a coincidence. Do you have any relatives named Margaret? Well, that's another reason why I came to talk to you. She took a deep breath before continuing. Margaret Sanders was my younger sister. She disappeared about 6 years ago. The revelation struck Arthur like lightning. Your sister? Margaret had problems with drugs, serious problems. In the last years I saw her, she was living on the streets, completely addicted. One day she simply disappeared. We never heard from her again. And you suspect that Isabel may be her daughter. I've suspected it for some time, but I had no way to be sure. The age matches, the physical appearance has similarities, and now this document. Arthur stood up and began to walk around the office, trying to process all this information. Florence, if that's true, it means you're Isabel's aunt. Why didn't you say so before? Because I wasn't sure, and because I'm afraid. Afraid of what? If Margaret was alive when she left Isabel with Barnaby, where is she now? Why has she never come back for her daughter? And if she's dead, as Barnaby claimed, what evidence is there of that? The implications were terrifying. If Margaret had been killed or made to disappear, Isabel wasn't just an abused child. She was a child whose right to family had been deliberately suppressed. There's one more thing, said Florence, her voice becoming even lower. Yesterday after school I went to the municipal cemetery to look for a grave of Margaret Sanders. I didn't find any. That may mean she was buried somewhere else or that she's still alive. The silence that followed was heavy with the implications of that possibility. If Margaret was alive, where was she? Why hadn't she looked for her daughter? And most importantly, who was preventing mother and daughter from reuniting? Florence, have you told these suspicions to anyone? To no one. I'm afraid of the consequences. You saw what happened to you when you started asking questions. Imagine what they would do to me if they found out I'm investigating on my own. But we have to do something. If your suspicions are correct, Isabel is being kept away from her real family. I know, but we need to be very careful. The people involved in this scheme have a lot of power in the city. At that moment, they heard footsteps in the hallway of the studio. Florence quickly collected all the documents and put them in the folder. We can't meet here anymore, she whispered. It's too risky. Carmela appeared at the office door, stopping abruptly when she saw Florence. Sorry to interrupt, she said, but her eyes were clearly watching the folder that Florence was holding. No problem, said Arthur. Professor Florence was just discussing some issues about art education for children. Maybe we can organize some pottery workshops at the school. What an interesting idea, replied Carmela, but her tone suggested distrust. Florence said goodbye quickly and left the studio. As she walked away, Arthur noticed that Carmela was watching her through the window with a worried expression. Arthur, said Carmela, turning to him, are you sure it's wise to get involved with more people in this situation? What situation? You know what I'm talking about. Things are already bad enough for the studio. If you keep insisting on this matter, you may end up losing everything. Carmela, a child may be being kept away from her real family. How can I ignore that? Because it's not your problem. And she exploded, losing her composure for the first time in years. You have a studio to save, employees who depend on you. You can't sacrifice all that for a girl who isn't even your responsibility. Carmela's extreme reaction confirmed Arthur's suspicions about her involvement in the protection scheme, but it also gave him a new determination. If they were so desperate to make him stop, it meant he was on the right track. Carmela, I think you should take a few days off. You need to rest. Arthur, don't do this. Don't push me away now. You need people who care about you. People who care about me wouldn't try to stop me from protecting an innocent child. And when Carmela left the office, visibly shaken, Arthur made a decision that would completely change the course of his investigation. It was time to look for Margaret Sanders, even if it meant turning over every stone in the region until he found her. The search for Margaret Sanders began in the most obvious places: recovery homes, shelters for addicts, and rehabilitation clinics in the region. Arthur spent the next few days driving to neighboring towns, always with the excuse of visiting suppliers or potential clients, so as not to raise suspicion about his true intentions. In Ojai, he found the first real lead. A social worker at a rehabilitation clinic recognized the name when he mentioned it casually during a conversation about regional social programs. "Margaret Sanders?" repeated the woman, consulting some old files. "Yes, she was here about 3 years ago. She stayed with us for almost 8 months. And then, she completed the program successfully. She was one of the most determined patients we've ever had. She talked constantly about going home and reuniting with her daughter." Arthur's heart raced. Did she mention anything specific about this? Her daughter? Yes, a little girl named Isabel. Margaret carried a picture of the child all the time. She said she was recovering so she could take care of her properly. And where did she go when she left the clinic? She said she would return to Willow Creek. She was anxious to see her daughter again, who was being temporarily cared for by someone in the family. The information confirmed Florence's suspicions, but also raised even more disturbing questions. If Margaret had recovered and returned to look for Isabel, why was the girl still with Barnaby? And why had no one seen Margaret in town? Arthur decided to check other sources. He visited the Willow Creek bus station and talked to older employees who might remember a woman arriving from Ojai about 3 years ago. "Margaret Sanders?" repeated the ticket clerk, a middle-aged man who had worked there for over 15 years. "Name doesn't ring a bell, but I can check the old records." After a few minutes searching through dusty files, the man found what he was looking for. Here it is. Margaret Sanders bought a ticket from Ojai to Willow Creek on March 15th, 2021, one-way trip. "Are you sure she took the trip?" "The ticket was used, yes. I have the record here." So Margaret had actually returned to Willow Creek 3 years ago. But if she had arrived in the city, where was she now? And why hadn't anyone seen her? That night, Arthur met secretly with Florence at the small diner on the outskirts of town. She had requested time off from work, claiming personal problems, to avoid any suspicion about their meetings. "I found traces of Margaret," he said, telling her about his discoveries at the clinic and the bus station. Florence was visibly emotional. So she really was alive 3 years ago, and she recovered from the addiction. The question is, where is she now? If she came back to look for Isabel, why is the girl still with Barnaby? "I can only think of 2 possibilities," said Florence, her voice trembling slightly. "Either something happened to her when she tried to get Isabel back, or someone stopped her by force." The implication hung between them like a dark cloud. If Margaret had been prevented from recovering her daughter, it meant that the scheme involving Isabel was much more sinister than they had imagined. "Florence, do you have any old photos of Margaret? Something we can show to people in town?" "I have some family photos, but I'm afraid to go around asking questions. If the wrong people find out I'm looking for her, then I'll ask," said Arthur. "My reputation is already destroyed. Anyway, I have nothing left to lose." Florence took a small photo album from her bag and chose one where Margaret appeared smiling, with long hair and bright eyes. It was a photo from before the addiction, but it would still be useful for identification. "She was beautiful," commented Arthur. "She was. And she was a good person before the drugs. She always took care of me when we were little, even though she was only 2 years older." "And your parents? Do they know about your suspicions? My parents died 4 years ago in a car accident. If they knew that Margaret may have had a daughter, they would have moved heaven and earth to find her. Arthur carefully put the photo away. I'll start the investigation tomorrow. But Florence, if anything happens to me, you need to promise that you'll keep looking for answers. Don't talk like that. Nothing's going to happen. You saw what they did to my business when I started asking questions. These people don't hesitate to use any method to protect their secrets. The next morning, Arthur began his investigation by showing Margaret's photo to local merchants, always with the excuse that he was looking for a former employee who might be interested in returning to work. It was at the third establishment he visited that he found the first real clue. The owner of a pharmacy in downtown examined the photo carefully before answering. This woman, yes, I remember her. She showed up here about 3 years ago looking for information about a child. What kind of information? She wanted to know if I knew a girl named Isabel who would be living with a man named Barnaby. She said she was the child's mother and was trying to locate her. And what did you tell her? I said I knew Barnaby by sight, that he works on Mr. Thompson's farm. I gave her the directions. And she went there? I assume so. She left here very determined. Arthur felt a chill down his spine. If Margaret had gone to look for Barnaby 3 years ago and had never been seen again, what had happened at that meeting? Did you ever see her again after that? No, never again. I thought it was strange because she seemed very anxious to find her daughter. I thought she would come back to thank me for the information, or at least to buy something. Arthur thanked him and left the pharmacy with more questions than answers. He decided it was time for a more direct approach. He needed to confront Barnaby about what had happened when Margaret looked for him. But before doing that, he wanted to have at least one witness. He called Florence and asked her to meet him on the road that led to Mr. Thompson's farm. You sure this is safe?" she asked when they met near a small grove that offered a good view of the property. "I'm not sure of anything anymore, but I can't keep investigating in secret forever. I need direct answers." They positioned themselves where they could observe the farm without being seen. Arthur had brought a small recorder, hoping to document anything that Barnaby might admit. Around 5 in the afternoon, they saw Barnaby leaving the stables and heading towards his small house in the back of the property. It was the opportunity Arthur had been waiting for. "Stay here," he said to Florence. "If something goes wrong, leave immediately and seek help." "Arthur, I should go with you. If Isabel is really my niece, exactly why you should stay here. If something happens to me, you'll be the only person who knows the truth." Arthur approached Barnaby's house with his heart pounding. Through a window, he could see the man preparing dinner. He took a deep breath and knocked on the door. "Who is it?" shouted Barnaby from inside the house. "Arthur Davenport. I need to talk to you about Margaret Sanders." The silence that followed lasted too long. When Barnaby finally opened the door, his expression was that of someone who had seen a ghost. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, but his voice betrayed nervousness. "I know she came to look for you 3 years ago. I know she was trying to get Isabel back. The question is, where is she now?" Barnaby looked nervously around, as if checking if anyone else was watching. "You shouldn't be here asking these questions," he said. "Some things are better left alone. Not when it involves a child being kept away from her mother." "Isabel's mother is dead," said Barnaby, but something in his tone suggested he was repeating a rehearsed lie. "Margaret was alive 3 years ago, and she recovered from the addiction. She came to get her daughter. What did you do with her?" The direct question made Barnaby recoil. For a moment he seemed about to confess something. Then his expression changed completely. "You need to leave now." "I'm not leaving without answers. Then you'll regret coming here." It was then that Arthur heard the sound of heavy footsteps approaching from behind. He turned and saw two men he didn't recognize walking towards him, both with threatening expressions. He realized he had made a fatal mistake. He had underestimated the reach and determination of the people involved in the scheme. And now he was alone, isolated, and clearly in danger. The two men approached Arthur with deliberately slow movements, like predators circling prey. The taller one, with scars on his face and muscular arms, spoke first. "Mr. Davenport, I think you're lost. This is private property." "I was just talking to Barnaby about business matters," replied Arthur, trying to keep his voice steady while assessing his escape options. "What kind of business?" asked the second man, shorter but equally intimidating. "From what I heard, your studio hasn't been doing so well lately." "How do you know about my studio?" "In a small town, everyone knows everything," said the tall man, taking another step towards Arthur. "Especially when someone starts asking questions that bother important people." Barnaby, who had remained at the door watching, finally spoke. "Up. I told him not to stick his nose where it doesn't belong. Now it's his problem." "Listen carefully," said the short man, positioning himself next to Arthur. "You have two options. You can stop asking questions about things that are none of your business and go back to taking care of your studio in peace. Or you can keep insisting and discover that Willow Creek can be a very uncomfortable place for those who don't know how to behave." "Are you threatening me?" "We're offering friendly advice," replied the tall man, "the same offer that was made to other people who asked similar questions in the past." "What other people?" The two men exchanged a meaningful look. "Let's just say that some people learn the lesson quickly. Others find that it's better to look for new horizons in other cities." The implication was clear. Margaret hadn't been the first person to question the scheme, and others had been forced to leave town or worse. "And if I don't accept this friendly advice? Then we'll have to be less friendly," said the short man, opening his jacket slightly to reveal a piece of iron wrapped in electrical tape. "Accidents happen, businesses catch fire, people get hurt." Arthur felt cold sweat running down his back. He was clearly in a dangerous situation, but a part of him refused to back down. He thought of Isabel, of the way she flinched in fear, of the kernels she carried as a symbol of her suffering. "I'll think about what you said," he replied finally. "You have until tomorrow night," said the tall man. "After that, we'll assume you've chosen the hard way." Arthur walked away slowly, without running so as not to show fear, but quickening his pace as soon as he was out of the men's visual range. When he arrived at the place where he had left Florence, he found her visibly terrified. "I could hear raised voices," she said. "What happened?" "They threatened me directly, and they made it clear that other people who asked similar questions were discouraged from continuing." "Oh my God, do you think they did something to Margaret?" "I'm sure of it now. The question is whether she's still alive or if—" He didn't finish the sentence, but they both understood the implication. "Arthur, maybe we should stop here. Call the police. Try to resolve this officially. The local police may be involved too. Remember you mentioned that one of the children lives with the police chief's sister-in-law?" Florence nodded sadly. "So what do? We need outside help, and we need to get concrete evidence before they decide to silence us too." The next morning, Arthur called Dr. Robert Myers, the lawyer from Santa Barbara he had consulted previously. He explained the updated situation and asked for urgent guidance. "Mr. Davenport, what you're describing is extremely serious. We have indications of a child exploitation network, local corruption, and possibly kidnapping or coercion. You need to get out of that town immediately. I can't just abandon Isabel. If you get killed or disappear, you won't be able to help her in any way. Come to Santa Barbara today. We can prepare a formal complaint for the federal district attorney's office." "And how long would that take?" "Weeks, maybe months. Complex investigations involving local authorities aren't quick." Isabel doesn't have weeks or months. With each passing day, she's suffering. I understand your concern, but you need to think strategically. Dead, you don't help anyone. After hanging up the phone, Arthur spent hours pondering his options. They all seemed inadequate. Fleeing and leaving Isabel helpless, or staying and risking never being able to help her due to the personal danger. It was then that he made a desperate decision. If he couldn't trust the local authorities or wait for slow federal investigations, he would need to find a way to rescue Isabel directly. That afternoon, he and Florence met again, this time at a small church, on the outskirts of the city where no one would see them together. "Florence, I'm going to propose something that may seem crazy," he said. "But I think it's our only option. What do you have in mind?" "We're going to take Isabel away from Barnaby, physically." "How? That would be kidnapping. Not if she's really your niece. If we can prove the kinship, you would have legal right to her. But we would need DNA tests, legal documentation. That would take months to get. Meanwhile, Isabel continues to suffer." Florence was silent for a long time, clearly struggling with the decision. "If we do this, we can't go back," she said finally. "I know, and I take full responsibility. If it goes wrong, you can say that I coerced you. No, if we're going to do this, we do it together. Isabel may be my niece, and if she is, I have an obligation to protect her." They spent the next hours planning carefully. They would need to find a moment when Isabel was alone, take her to a safe location, and then seek legal help in another city where they could present evidence without local interference. "Tomorrow is Saturday," said Florence. "Barnaby always goes to the bar downtown on Saturday afternoons. I've seen Isabel alone on the property several times during those hours. And how do we get to her without being seen? There's an old trail that passes behind the farm. It was used by the workers in the past. I can guide you through it. And then, where do we take her? I have a cousin in Ojai who can help us. She works at a legal shelter and has contacts with lawyers specializing in child rights." The plan was risky and potentially illegal, but it seemed to be the only way to get Isabel out of immediate danger while seeking a permanent legal solution. "There's one thing I need to tell you," said Florence, her voice becoming even lower. "Today, after school, I received an unexpected visit at the school." "From who?" "Valerie Macmillan. She wanted to know if I had talked to you recently about sensitive issues involving local children." "And what did you say?" "I lied. I said our only conversation was about possible art workshops, but she didn't seem convinced." "That confirms that she's involved in the protection scheme, and it means they know we're still investigating despite the threats." The revelation added urgency to their plan. If the people involved in the scheme knew that they were still investigating, they would soon take more drastic measures to silence them. "Florence, are you sure you want to do this? After tomorrow, our lives will never be the same." "I'm sure. If there's a possibility that Isabel is my niece, I can't abandon her. And even if she isn't, I can't let a child continue to suffer when I have the power to help her." When they parted that night, they both knew they were about to cross a line from which there would be no return. But they also knew it was the only way to save an innocent child from a corrupt system that kept her in captivity disguised as care. The next morning, Arthur woke up with a steely determination. He had spent the night organizing his personal and financial affairs, preparing for the possibility of having to leave Willow Creek permanently. In a few hours, he and Florence would attempt something that would forever change the destiny of Isabel and their own. Saturday dawned with a heavy sky, foreshadowing rain for the end of the day. Arthur woke up at 5 in the morning, his stomach churning with anxiety and the awareness of what he was about to do. He had slept little, spending the night mentally, reviewing every detail of the plan that he and Florence had drawn up. At 2 in the afternoon, they met at the beginning of the old trail that led to the back of Mr. Thompson's farm. Florence seemed as nervous as he was, but there was a determination in her eyes that wasn't present in previous meetings. "Are you sure Barnaby isn't on the property?" asked Arthur for the 3rd time. "I saw him leaving an hour ago, walking towards downtown. On Saturday afternoons, he always stays at the bar until at least 6. They walked silently along the narrow trail, avoiding branches that could make noise. The vegetation was dense, which offered good cover, but also made the path more difficult. After about 20 minutes, they reached a small clearing from where they could see the back of the property. The house where Barnaby lived with Isabel was simple, made of wood painted in faded blue, with a small fenced yard where some chickens pecked freely. There was a clothesline with clothes drying and, next to a leafy tree, a small wooden bench. "There," whispered Florence, pointing to the yard. "It's Isabel." The girl was sitting under the tree, alone, doing something with her hands that they couldn't see clearly at a distance. She was wearing the same faded pink dress that Arthur had seen at their first meeting, and her hair was tied in 2 disheveled braids. "How do we get to her without scaring her?" asked Arthur. "Leave it to me. She knows me from school." Florence left the cover of the trees and walked slowly towards the fence that bordered the yard. Arthur remained hidden, observing and ready to intervene if anything went wrong. "Isabel," called Florence softly when she got close enough. The girl looked up, surprised. Arthur could see that she was holding small pieces of wood, apparently carving something with a makeshift knife made of rusty metal. "Professor Florence, what are you doing here?" "I came to see you. Can I come in?" Isabel looked nervously towards the house, then nodded. Florence went around the fence and approached the girl, crouching next to her. "What are you doing?" "I'm trying to make a wooden bird, like the ones I see flying around here." Florence examined the small object in Isabel's hands. It was rough, clearly made by a child, but there was something touching about the attempt to create something beautiful amidst so much harshness. "It's very pretty. Do you like to do these things?" "I do. When Mr. Barnaby isn't here, I take little pieces of wood and try to make things. He doesn't like it when he sees me doing it. He says it's a waste of time." "Isabel, can I ask you an important question?" The girl nodded, but her eyes became cautious. "Do you remember your mother? What was she like?" "A little bit. She had long hair and sang to me, but Mr. Barnaby says she left because she didn't like me. What if I told you that that may not be true?" Isabel looked directly at Florence, a fragile hope shining in her eyes. "What do you mean?" "Isabel, I think your mother may be my sister. That would make me your aunt." The revelation made the girl drop the piece of wood she was carving. "Your sister?" "My sister's name is Margaret. She disappeared a few years ago, but we believe you may be her daughter. But Mr. Barnaby said she died. People sometimes tell lies to children, thinking they're protecting them, but sometimes those lies hurt more than the truth." Isabel remained silent for a long moment, processing information too complex for her age. "If you're my aunt, can I live with you?" "That's exactly what I wanted to talk to you about. But first, I need you to trust me." "Do you trust me?" "I trust you. You've always been nice to me at school. Then I need you to come with me now. There's someone who wants to meet you very much, someone who can help you." "Who?" "A good man who cares about you. You've talked to him before, in the park." Isabel's eyes lit up. "The man who gave me the card?" "Exactly. He's here with us, and together we want to take you to a safe place. But what if Mr. Barnaby gets angry when he comes back and doesn't find me? You don't need to worry about that anymore. If you come with us, you won't need to come back here." The promise made Isabel start to cry, not from sadness, but from a relief so profound that it was impossible to contain it. "Can I really not come back? Won't I need to kneel on the corn any more?" "Never again." Isabel stood up quickly, wiping the tears with her dirty hands. "Can I take my bird?" "Of course you can." At that moment, Arthur came out of his hiding place and approached slowly. Isabel ran towards him and hugged him, a gesture that caught him completely off guard. "I knew you were going to help me," she said, her voice muffled against his. "Shirt. I always wanted to help you, Isabel, and now we're going to do it." They began to walk away from the house, heading towards the trail they had arrived by. Isabel held Florence's hand tightly, while carrying her little wooden bird in the other hand. It was when they were reaching the cover of the trees that they heard the sound that made them freeze, a car engine approaching the house. "He's back early," whispered Florence, terrified. They hid quickly behind a group of trees, watching as Barnaby's truck parked near the house. But when he got out of the vehicle, he wasn't alone. The two men who had threatened Arthur the day before came out of the passenger seat. "Isabel!" shouted Barnaby when he realized that the yard was empty. "Where are you?" "They came to look." "For us," whispered Arthur. "Someone must have seen us." The three men began to search the surroundings of the house, shouting Isabel's name and making threats about what would happen when they found her. "Where do we go now?" asked Florence. "We can't go back through the trail. They'll see." "Us?" Arthur looked around, trying to identify an alternative escape route. The property was surrounded by open pastures on three sides, but there was a small dirt road on the opposite side that could take them back to town without passing through the main entrance of the farm. "That way," he said, pointing, "but we'll have to run through the open pasture. They might see us." "Aunt Florence," said Isabel, pulling on the professor's sleeve, "I know a secret path. I use it when I want to hide from Mr. Barnaby." "What path?" "There's a broken fence over there." She pointed in a direction they hadn't considered. "On the other side, there's a very tall cornfield. We can hide there." It was risky to trust a 6-year-old to guide them, but it seemed to be the best option available. "Lead us," said Arthur. Isabel led them along a path that she clearly knew well, bypassing natural obstacles and avoiding exposed areas with the skill of someone who had used this route many times before to escape difficult situations. When they reached the broken fence, they could hear the men's shouts getting more distant. The cornfield on the other side was really dense, offering perfect cover. "This way," whispered Isabel, crouching down and moving between the rows of corn with ease. As they followed the girl through the plantation, Arthur couldn't help but notice the bitter irony of the situation. They were using a cornfield, the same cereal that had been an instrument of torture for Isabel, as a means to free her from her torturers. After 20 minutes walking through the plantation, they reached the dirt road that Arthur had identified. Their car was parked about a kilometer away, where they had agreed to leave it as a precaution. "We did it," said Florence, breathing heavily. But when they got to the car, they found an unpleasant surprise. The tires had been punctured, and a message was written on the dusty windshield. "You can't hide forever." "They knew we were here," said Arthur, feeling the panic growing. "How?" "Are we going to get out of here now?" asked Florence. It was Isabel who offered the solution, with the practical innocence of a child who had learned to fend for herself. "There's a house up ahead where Mrs. Bennet lives. She's nice. She can help us." It was their only option. With Isabel guiding them by the hand, they walked towards a small yellow house at the end of the road, hoping to find help before their pursuers discovered where they were. Mrs. Rosa Bennet was a 67-year-old lady, widowed for a decade, who lived alone in the small yellow house, surrounded by a garden full of colorful flowers. When she opened the door and saw Isabel accompanied by 2 unknown adults, all with the appearance of having run through the woods, her first reaction was distrust. "Isabel? What are you doing here, honey? And who are these people?" Mrs. Bennet, they're my friends. They helped me run away from Mr. Barnaby, said Isabel, with the simplicity of a child who hadn't yet learned to lie about complex situations. Mrs. Bennet's expression changed immediately. She had known Isabel for years. She saw the girl passing by the road, always alone, always with that sadness in her eyes that shouldn't exist in a child. "Run away? Why, dear?" Before Isabel could answer, Florence stepped forward. "Ma'am, my name is Florence Sanders. I'm Isabel's teacher at the municipal school. This child is in danger, and we urgently need help." "What kind of danger?" "Abuse, neglect. We've long suspected that she's not being cared for properly." Mrs. Bennet looked carefully at the three visitors, then crouched down to Isabel's height. "Is that true, honey? Does Mr. Barnaby hurt you?" Isabel nodded sadly, then raised the sleeves of her dress, revealing small scars on her arms that Mrs. Bennet had never noticed before. "My God," whispered the lady. Come in, everyone, quickly." She led them into the simple but cozy house, with old furniture and the characteristic smell of cinnamon and fresh coffee. On the walls, there were family photos and some religious paintings. "Sit down," said Mrs. Bennet, indicating the flowered fabric sofa. "I'll make some tea and you can tell me everything." As she moved around the kitchen, Arthur watched Isabel exploring the room with curious eyes. It was obvious that she rarely had the opportunity to be in a normal and welcoming home environment. "Mrs. Bennet," said Isabel when the lady returned with a tray of tea and cookies, "Aunt Florence said she may be my real aunt. My mother may be alive." The revelation made Mrs. Bennet almost drop the cup she was holding. "What do you mean, dear?" Florence explained her suspicions about the kinship, showing the photo of Margaret and telling about her discoveries at the rehabilitation clinic. Mrs. Bennet listened attentively, asking occasional questions and carefully observing Isabel's reactions. "That Margaret in the photo," said Mrs. Bennet finally, "I knew her. She was here in this house about 3 years ago." The silence that followed was total. Arthur, Florence, and even Isabel stopped moving, processing the importance of this revelation. "She was here?" asked Florence, her voice trembling with emotion. "Yes. One afternoon in March, she showed up here asking about a little girl who would be living with Barnaby Ferreira. She said she was the child's mother and was trying to locate her." "And what did you tell her?" "I said I knew Isabel, that I saw her passing by here almost every day. I explained where Barnaby's house was and offered to accompany her there." "Did she accept?" "No. She said she wanted to go alone first to talk to Mr. Barnaby in private. She asked me not to mention our conversation to anyone until she'd had a chance to sort things out." Arthur leaned forward. "And then? Did you see her again?" "Never. I thought it was strange because she seemed so eager to see her daughter. I thought she'd come back to thank me, or at least to tell me how the reunion had gone." "Weren't you worried when she didn't come back?" "I was, yes. After a few weeks, I asked around to see if anyone had seen a new woman in town, but nobody knew anything. Over time, I figured maybe she'd managed to take her daughter away quietly." Florence and Arthur exchanged significant glances. If Margaret had disappeared right after going to see Mr. Barnaby, that confirmed their worst suspicions about what had happened to her. "Mrs. Rosa," Arthur said, "we brought Isabel here because we believe she's in immediate danger. But now, we're also being followed by people who don't want the truth to come out." "Followed how?" "Direct threats, sabotage of our business, and we just found out that someone slashed my tires to stop us from leaving town." Mrs. Rosa looked visibly worried. "That's very serious. You need help from the police." "The problem is, we suspect that some local authorities may be involved in the scheme that keeps Isabel and other children in irregular situations." "Other children?" "We've found evidence that Isabel isn't the only child being kept by people who don't have legal rights over them." Mrs. Rosa got up and walked to the window, watching the road carefully. I don't see anyone around now, but that could change quickly. Do you have a phone? We need to contact authorities from outside the town. I do, but before you make any calls, you need to know one more thing. She returned to the living room and sat next to Isabel, gently holding the girl's hands. Honey, do you remember the last time your mom came to see you? Isabel frowned, concentrating. My mom came to see me? A woman with long hair, like in this photo that Aunt Florence showed me. I remember a lady who came to talk to Mr. Barnaby a long time ago. They talked loudly, they argued, then she left crying. Do you remember what they said? Not much. But the lady kept asking him to let me go with her, and he said no, that I was his responsibility now. And then? Then Mr. Barnaby got really mad at me. He said that if I told anyone about that woman's visit, it would be much worse for me. Mrs. Rosa looked at the adults with a somber expression. So Margaret really did try to get Isabel back, but Mr. Barnaby refused to give her up. And then she disappeared, added Florence. The question is, did she disappear willingly or was she forced to? At that moment they heard the sound of vehicles approaching on the road. Mrs. Rosa stood up quickly and peeked through the window. 2 pickup trucks, she said, her voice tense. One of them is Mr. Barnaby's. They found us, Arthur said, feeling panic rising. How? Asked Florence. Probably asked everyone in the area if they'd seen a child with 2 adults. Small town, everyone is related. Mrs. Rosa made a quick decision. Come with me. I have a place where you can hide. She led them to the back of the house, where there was a small shed used to store garden tools and homemade preserves. But at the back of the shed, hidden behind shelves full of jars of jam, there was a small door that led to an underground cellar. My late husband built this during the time of very tense elections, when there were rumors of political violence. In the region, she explained as she helped them down a narrow ladder, never thought it would be used to hide a child from people who are supposed to protect her. The cellar was small but dry, with some old chairs and a wooden table. There were even some bottles of water and packs of crackers stored there. Stay here and don't make any noise. I'll talk to them and try to find out what they want. When Mrs. Rosa closed the door above them, the cellar became almost completely dark, illuminated only by small rays of light filtering through cracks in the wooden floor above. I'm scared, whispered Isabel, snuggling between Arthur and Florence. It's going to be okay, promised Florence, hugging the girl. Mrs. Rosa is a good person. She won't let anything happen to us. Through the wooden floor, they could hear loud voices in the house. Mr. Barnaby was clearly agitated, asking about a missing child. Mrs. Rosa replied calmly, denying having seen anything unusual. I know she's here, shouted Mr. Barnaby. Someone saw her walking in this direction with 2 adults. I haven't seen any child, replied Mrs. Rosa firmly. And I don't appreciate the tone you're using in my house. This isn't over, said a voice that Arthur recognized as belonging to one of the men who had threatened him. We'll search the whole area if we have to. Not without a warrant, replied Mrs. Rosa, and now get off my property before I call the police. After a few minutes of heated discussion, they heard the vehicles driving away. But Mrs. Rosa didn't come to release them immediately, suggesting that she was being cautious to make sure the men wouldn't return. In the dark cellar, Isabel began to hum softly a melody that Arthur didn't recognize. It was a sad song, but there was something hopeful in it too. What song is that? Asked Florence gently. My mum used to sing it to me. It's the only thing I still remember clearly about her. In the dark, Florence began to cry silently. If Isabel was really her niece, then that melody was a song that she also knew from childhood, a song that Margaret used to sing when they were little. It was further evidence that they were on the right track, but also a painful reminder of all that had been lost and how much they still needed to fight to reunite a family that had been forcibly separated. They spent 2 hours in the cellar before Mrs. Rosa returned to release them. When she finally opened the door, her face was tense with worry. "They're gone, but not far," she said, helping them up. "I saw the pickup trucks parked at the entrance to the town, like they were setting up a blockade." "They can't do that legally," protested Arthur. "Legally or not, they're doing it, and I'm sure they'll invent some justification if anyone questions it." Florence held Isabel's hand as they walked back to the house. "Mrs. Rosa, do you have any suggestions on how we can get out of here without being detected?" "As a matter of fact, I do, but it will require you to trust me completely. We're willing to listen to anything." Mrs. Rosa led them to the kitchen and poured more tea, as if the normalcy of the action could calm the tension of the moment. "My nephew Richard works as a delivery truck driver. Every Monday, he stops by here to take me supplies for the market in Ojai. The truck has a cargo compartment that can hide you 3. "That would be asking too much," Arthur said. "We don't want to involve more innocent people in this situation." "Richard isn't exactly innocent," Mrs. Rosa said with a wry smile. "He's had his own problems with certain local authorities, tax issues that were never resolved properly. Let's just say he doesn't have much appreciation for how some things work in this town." "And when does he come by?" "Tomorrow morning at 7 o'clock. You can spend the night here, and in the morning we'll leave together." "We can't put you in danger too," said Florence. "My dear, at 67 years old, I've lived long enough to know when an injustice is happening in front of me, and I can't simply ignore a child who needs help." Isabel, who had remained quiet during the conversation, approached Mrs. Rosa and hugged her spontaneously. "Thank you for helping us," she said in her sweet little voice. "You're welcome, honey. Now come on, I'll show you where there are some storybooks while the adults talk." While Mrs. Rosa distracted Isabel in the living room, Arthur and Florence talked in hushed voices in the kitchen about their next steps. "If we can get to Ojai, we can contact the district attorney's office," Arthur said. "Dr. Myers said we can file a formal complaint. But what if it takes too long? What if Mr. Barnaby manages to invent some story to incriminate us in the meantime?" "It's a risk we have to take. The important thing is to get Isabel out of immediate danger." "Arthur, there's something I need to tell you," Florence said, her voice even lower. "When Isabel sang that song in the cellar, I recognized the melody." "How so?" "It was a song that Margaret and I used to sing when we were little. Our grandmother taught it to us. Every family has its special songs that pass down through generations. Does that confirm that she's your niece?" "Almost certainly. A child wouldn't learn that specific song unless it was taught by someone from our family." The revelation brought a mixture of joy and sadness. Joy that Isabel had a family that wanted her, sadness at the confirmation that Margaret had been prevented from recovering her daughter. That night, Mrs. Rosa improvised accommodations for her unexpected guests. Isabel slept in her own bed, while Arthur and Florence took turns watching the house and resting on the living room couch. Around 2 in the morning, Arthur was on guard when he heard suspicious noises outside. He peered carefully through the window and saw figures moving in the shadows near the house. He woke Florence silently and indicated that there was suspicious movement outside. They remained motionless, watching, until the figures moved away. They were clearly people watching the house, but for some reason, they didn't try to enter. "They know we're here," whispered Florence. "They're just waiting to see what we're going to do, or they're waiting for reinforcements." The next morning, Mrs. Rosa woke up early and prepared a hearty breakfast for everyone. At 6:30, the sound of Richard Thompson's truck could be heard approaching on the road. "Remember," said Mrs. Rosa as they prepared to leave, "when you get to Ojai, look for the cousin you mentioned, but be careful who you trust. If this scheme is as big as we suspect, it may have ramifications in other cities too. Richard Thompson was a man of about 40 years old, tall and thin, with a face marked by the sun and hands calloused from years of driving a truck. When Mrs. Rosa explained the situation, his reaction was immediate. "Of course, I'll help. I always knew there were strange things happening in this town, but I never imagined they involved children." The cargo compartment of the truck was used to transport fruits and vegetables, but Richard had removed the boxes to create a space where 3 people could hide comfortably. There were even some pillows and bottles of water. "The trip takes an hour and a half," explained Richard. "I'll stop at the market first, unload some things, and then take you where you need to go." As they were about to leave, Isabel ran back to hug Mrs. Rosa once more. "Are you going to miss us?" she asked. "I will, yes. But I'll be very happy knowing that you're safe and with people who really love you." The trip in the cargo compartment of the truck was uncomfortable but uneventful. Richard stopped only once, apparently to check if they were being followed, but there were no problems. When they arrived at the Ojai market, Richard helped them out of the truck discreetly in a less crowded area. "Good luck," he said, hugging each of them. "And if you need anything, you can count on me." Florence's cousin, Connie Beggar, worked at a municipal shelter a few blocks from the market. When Florence appeared at her door with Isabel and Arthur, quickly explaining the situation, Connie didn't hesitate to help. "Come in quickly," she said, checking to make sure no one was watching. "We can talk calmly in here." The shelter was a modest but well-kept building, with clean rooms and a welcoming atmosphere that contrasted drastically with the tension they had experienced in the last 24 hours. "Florence told me about you on the phone," Connie said to Isabel. "How about I show you where there are some toys while I talk to your aunt?" While Isabel was distracted in a room full of games and books, Connie listened to the whole story with professional attention. "You did the right thing bringing her here," she said when Florence and Arthur finished telling everything. "But the legal situation is complex. We're going to need DNA tests to confirm the relationship, documentation proving the abuse, and evidence of the irregularity of the current guardianship." "How long would that take?" asked Arthur. "A few weeks at least, but I can speed up some processes through my contacts in the district attorney's office." "And can Isabel stay here during that time?" "She can, but there's a problem. If Mr. Barnaby finds out where she is, he could claim kidnapping and demand that she be returned immediately, even if he doesn't have legal rights over her. Until we prove that he doesn't, he remains the guardian recognized by the local community." Florence walked to the window, watching Isabel play for the first time in a long time, with true joy. "Connie, I need to tell you something. Isabel's biological mother may still be alive." "What do you mean?" "We have evidence that she was forcibly prevented from recovering her daughter 3 years ago. She may be held captive, or worse." Connie looked visibly shaken. "That changes everything. If the biological mother is alive and has been prevented from exercising her parental rights, we have a case of kidnapping and unlawful imprisonment." "Exactly, but how do we prove it? First, let's formalize the complaint about Isabel. Then, we're going to demand an investigation into the whereabouts of Margaret Sanders." At that moment, Isabel appeared at the door, holding a drawing she had made. Aunt Florence, look what I drew." The drawing showed a small house surrounded by flowers, with 4 smiling figures in front, a long-haired woman who clearly represented Margaret, Florence, Arthur, and herself. "I drew our family when my mom comes back," she explained, with the simple hope of a child who still believed that happy endings were possible. Florence knelt beside the girl, hugging her with tears in her eyes. "We're going to do everything we can to make that happen," she promised. "Everything." But as they made plans for the next legal steps, none of them imagined that the most shocking discovery was yet to come, a revelation that would completely change not only Isabel's destiny, but also the way they understood the whole scheme. They had uncovered 3 days after arriving at the shelter in Ojai, the formal investigation began to reveal findings that no one had anticipated. Connie had contacted District Attorney Robert Wilson, specializing in crimes against children, who took the case with immediate seriousness. "What you've discovered is just the tip of the iceberg," said Mr. Wilson during a meeting at the shelter. "We started investigating the official records of Willow Creek and found irregularities far more extensive than we imagined." He spread a series of documents on the table. "In the last 5 years, at least 15 children have been informally placed with families in the area or without proper legal process, and all of these children have one thing in common." "What?" asked Arthur. "They all originally came from the same unregulated shelter that was closed 5 years ago, the Santa Esperanza home in Santa Barbara." Florence leaned forward. "And what happened to that shelter?" "It was closed after reports of abuse, child labor, and financial irregularities. But here's the interesting part. When it was closed, local authorities claimed that all the children were adequately relocated to approved families. But that's not what happened. Apparently not. We discovered that many of these children were simply distributed to people who had political connections or who offered to help without any verification or legal follow-up." Connie examined the documents. "This suggests an organized scheme of irregular distribution of children." "Exactly. And there's something even more disturbing." Mr. Wilson pulled out a separate folder and opened it carefully. "We gained access to the original records of the Santa Esperanza home. Isabel was there, registered under the name of Isabel Sanders, daughter of Margaret Sanders." "So, she really is my niece," whispered Florence, definitely confirming her suspicions. "Yes, but there's something you need to know about how she got to the shelter." The district attorney paused, clearly hesitant about how to proceed. "Margaret Sanders did not voluntarily give Isabel to the shelter. According to the records, the child was temporarily removed from maternal custody due to a high-risk situation related to substance use." "Removed by whom?" "Here's the part that will shock you. The removal process was initiated by a report from Valerie McMillan, who at the time worked as a social worker in Santa Barbara before transferring to Willow Creek." The silence in the room was absolute. Arthur felt as if the floor had disappeared beneath his feet. Valerie was involved from the beginning. Not just involved. According to these documents, she was the one who recommended that Isabel be temporarily placed with Mr. Barnaby Ferreira when the shelter was closed. Florence stood up abruptly. "She knew from the beginning that Isabel was my niece. She knew and never said anything. Worse than that," continued Mr. Wilson. "We found evidence that Valerie maintained regular contact with Mr. Barnaby throughout all these years, always discouraging any deeper investigation into Isabel's situation." "And Margaret? What happened to her when she came back to get her daughter? That's the most disturbing discovery of all." Mr. Wilson pulled a medical report dated 3 years ago from the folder. "Margaret Sanders was forcibly admitted to Hope Clinic, a private psychiatric institution on the outskirts of Willow Creek, exactly 2 weeks after she was last seen in town." "Admitted by whom?" "By order of Valerie McMillan, who claimed that Margaret was exhibiting erratic behavior and threatening the safety of local minors." Arthur felt a growing anger burning in his chest. She invented a justification to admit Margaret and prevent her from getting Isabel back. And she kept her admitted for 3 years under heavy medication that left her unable to seek legal help or contact her family. "Is she still there?" asked Florence, her voice full of emotion. "She is, and according to the medical records we obtained, there is no real clinical justification for her prolonged admission. She has been kept deliberately sedated and isolated," Connie spoke up. That's kidnapping and unlawful imprisonment. How many crimes were committed to keep this scheme running? Many. And there is evidence that other families have been separated in a similar way. Parents who tried to recover their children were intimidated, threatened, or in extreme cases, removed from the equation through forced admissions or other methods. At that moment, Isabel appeared at the door, holding a storybook. "Aunt Florence, can you read to me?" The girl's presence brought a new urgency to the situation. She shouldn't grow another day without knowing that her mother was alive and trying to come back to her. "Isabel," said Florence, kneeling down to be at the girl's height, "I have something very important to tell you." "What is it?" "Remember, I told you that your mom might be alive? Well, we found out that she really is alive." Isabel's eyes widened. "She is? Where?" "She's in a place where people are taking care of her because she got sick. But she's not really sick. Some bad people made her stay there to stop her from coming to get you." "Can I see her?" Mr. Wilson spoke up. "We're arranging that, Isabel. Very soon you and your mom will meet." "And then can I live with her?" "Then you'll be able to be together forever," promised Florence. That afternoon, Mr. Wilson organized a coordinated operation, while a team from the district attorney's office headed to Willow Creek to arrest Valerie and Mr. Barnaby. Another team went to Hope Clinic to release Margaret and assess her health. Arthur insisted on accompanying the team that went to get Margaret. After everything she had been through, he wanted to be present when mother and daughter finally reunited. Hope Clinic was a white, aseptic building, surrounded by high walls and fences that looked more like a prison than a health institution. When the legal team arrived with warrants, the administration's resistance was immediate. "You can't just remove a patient without medical authorization," protested the director of the clinic. "We can when the admission was based on fraudulent documents," replied Mr. Wilson, showing the official papers. Margaret Sanders was found in a small, windowless room, sitting on a bed staring blankly at the wall. At 32 years old, she seemed to have aged a decade. Her hair had been cut very short, and she was visibly sedated. "Margaret," said Mr. Wilson gently, "my name is Robert. I've come to get you out of here." She turned her eyes slowly towards the voice, but her reaction was minimal. She was clearly under the influence of heavy medication. "Isabel," she murmured, the only word she managed to pronounce clearly. "Your daughter is safe," said Arthur, approaching. "We're taking you to meet her." The process of transferring Margaret from the clinic was complex, involving immediate medical evaluation to determine what medications she was taking and how to reverse the effects of prolonged sedation. During the trip back to Ojai, Margaret remained silent, but her hands trembled constantly, not from fear, but from anticipation. Mr. Wilson had explained that she might be disoriented initially, but that her lucidity should return gradually as the medication left her system. When they arrived at the shelter, Connie had carefully prepared Isabel for the meeting. The girl was visibly nervous, holding Florence's hand tightly. "She may not recognize you immediately," explained Connie. "It's been a long time, and she's been on medication that affects memory and coordination." When Margaret entered the room, supported by a nurse, the silence was absolute. Mother and daughter looked at each other for a long moment, each trying to recognize in the other the person they had lost years ago. It was Isabel who took the first step. She let go of Florence's hand and walked slowly towards her mother. "Mommy," she said, her little voice uncertain. The sound of her daughter's voice seemed to break Margaret's lethargic state. Her eyes focused, and she extended her trembling arms. "My little girl," she whispered, her voice hoarse from years of disuse. "My little girl." When they embraced, there were no words for several minutes, only silent tears and the sound of a mother humming softly the same melody that Isabel had preserved in her memory during all those difficult years. It was the beginning of healing for a family that had been brutally separated, but also the end of a corrupt scheme that had destroyed many other lives. The truth had finally won, but the price had been years of unnecessary suffering for innocent people. 6 months after the reunion between Margaret and Isabel, the small family had found a new balance in a rented house on the outskirts of Ojai. Margaret's recovery had been slow but steady. Her mind was clear again, free of the medications that had kept her sedated for years, but the emotional scars would take much longer to heal. Isabel, now 7 years old, attended a new school where she was simply a normal child without the weight of the trauma she had carried for so long. Her nights of nightmare had become rare, replaced by dreams where she flew freely like the birds she always drew. "Is Aunt Florence coming to lunch today?" asked Isabel on a sunny Sunday morning, helping Margaret prepare a corn cake, a sweet irony considering how that cereal had represented suffering in her past life. "Yes, she is. And Uncle Arthur too," replied Margaret, watching with joy as her daughter had regained her childish spontaneity. The relationship between the two was still being rebuilt, but day after day it became more solid. Margaret was relearning to be a mother, while Isabel was relearning to trust in unconditional love. When Florence and Arthur arrived for lunch, they brought important news about the legal developments in the case that had changed all their lives. "The trial of Valerie and Mr. Barnaby has been set for next month," announced Arthur, as they sat at the simple but welcoming table. "Mr. Wilson said the evidence is so compelling that they will hardly escape a severe conviction." "And the other children?" asked Margaret, who had become a passionate advocate for all the minors who had been victims of the same scheme. 12 of the 15 children have already been reunited with their biological families or placed in legally appropriate homes," replied Florence. "The remaining 3 are more complex cases where the original families really couldn't take care of them, but they are now in the process of legal and transparent adoption." "And Mr. Thompson?" asked Isabel, demonstrating an impressive maturity in following conversations about justice. "He claimed he didn't know anything about Mr. Barnaby's activities," said Arthur, "and technically there is no direct evidence that he was involved. But he lost much of the influence he had in town." "Sometimes justice isn't perfect," observed Margaret, "but at least the children are safe now." During lunch, Arthur made an announcement that surprised everyone. "I've decided to sell my factory in Willow Creek," he said, watching the reactions around the table. "Why?" asked Florence. "You worked so hard to build it." "Because I discovered that there are more important things than business, and because I want to use the money from the sale to create something new." "What kind of thing?" "A foundation to help families who have been separated by schemes similar to what we faced. There are many children and parents out there who need help to reunite." Margaret looked at him with admiration. "Arthur, you've already done so much for us. You don't have to sacrifice more." "It's not a sacrifice," he replied firmly. "It's purpose. I learned that a life is valued not by what we accumulate, but by the good we do." Isabel, who had been quiet during the conversation, stood up and hugged Arthur. "Are you going to help other children like you helped me?" "I'm going to try, little one. I'm going to try very hard." That afternoon, when they were on the small porch watching Isabel play in the yard, Florence asked a question that she had been holding back for months. "Margaret, can you forgive all the people who took those years from us?" Margaret was silent for a long time, watching her daughter laugh as she chased colorful butterflies. "I'm learning to forgive," she said finally, "not for them, but for me. Anger is a poison that we drink hoping that others will die. And I've lost too much time already." "But do you still feel angry?" "I do. Sometimes I wake up at night furious, for all the first steps I missed, all the new words I didn't hear, all the hugs I didn't give. But then I look at Isabel now. I see how strong and happy she is, and I realize that what's important isn't the time we lost, but the time we have ahead of us." Arthur, who was watching the conversation, spoke up. "You know you can count on me for anything, don't you? Not just financially, but as family, because that's what we've become, a chosen family." "I know," said Margaret, "and that means more to me than you can imagine. During the years in the clinic, when I could have moments of lucidity between the medication, I dreamed that one day I would find good people who would take care of Isabel if I couldn't. I never imagined that I would find people who would fight to give her back to me." As the sun began to set, painting the sky with golden tones reminiscent of the cornfields of Willow Creek, Isabel ran to them, carrying a drawing she had made during the afternoon. "Look what I drew," she said, holding out the paper. It was an image of 4 people holding hands in a flowery field, with colorful birds flying in circles above them. But this time, the birds weren't fleeing. They were dancing in the air, free and happy. "It's us," she explained unnecessarily, "and the birdies are happy because nobody is sad anymore." Florence picked up the girl in her arms. "And how do you feel now, Isabel?" "I feel like the birdies, free to fly but also free to stay, because I know you'll always be here when I come back." That night, after Arthur and Florence left, Margaret put Isabel to sleep as she had every night since they reunited. It was a sacred ritual that both had lost for years and now valued immensely. "Mommy," said Isabel when she was almost asleep, "do you think other children will find their families like I found mine?" "Some will, honey, and others will find new families who will love them as if they were blood daughters. What's important is that every child deserves to be loved. And will Uncle Arthur and Aunt Florence always be part of our family?" "Forever," promised Margaret. "Family isn't just about who gave birth to us. It's about who chooses to stay with us, take care of us, and fight for us when we need it." When Isabel finally fell asleep, Margaret remained sitting beside the bed for a few more minutes, watching her daughter's serene face. There were no more shadows of fear there. No more the constant tension that she had carried during the years with Mr. Barnaby. On the bedside table next to the bed was the small, rough wooden bird that Isabel had carved in Mr. Barnaby's backyard. The only object she had asked to bring from her previous life. Now, however, it wasn't alone. Next to it was a small family of carved birds that Arthur had made for her, each representing a member of her new extended family. It was a perfect metaphor. The suffering of the past hadn't been erased, but it had been transformed into something beautiful when surrounded by love and protection. Margaret walked to the window and looked at the stars over Ojai. Somewhere in that same darkness, other families were being separated by unscrupulous people. Other children were suffering in silence. But there were also people like Arthur and Florence, willing to fight against injustice, even when it seemed impossible to win. The foundation that Arthur was creating would be just the beginning. She herself had decided to study law, determined to become a lawyer specializing in reuniting separated families. Florence would continue to be a teacher, but now with a heightened awareness to identify children at risk. Together, they would form a network of protection for other families like theirs, and each child they managed to save would be a victory against the corrupt system that had almost destroyed their own lives. When she finally went to sleep, Margaret fell asleep with the same melody on her lips that she had sung to Isabel years ago, and that her daughter had preserved in her memory during all the difficult years. It was a song about free birds, about safe flights, and about always finding the way back home. And for the first time in a long time, home wasn't just a place. It was a reunited family, strong and complete, ready to face any storm that the future might bring, knowing that they would face it together. A year after Isabel's rescue, the Free Birds Foundation, a name chosen by the girl herself, was officially operating in a renovated building in downtown Ojai. The place had been an old abandoned school that Arthur bought and transformed into a support center for separated families and children at risk. Margaret, now 33 years old and in her third semester of law school, divided her time between her studies and volunteering at the foundation. Her transformation had been remarkable. From a woman broken by forced medication to a determined activist who used her own experience to help other families. "We have 15 new cases this week," she said during a morning meeting with Arthur and Florence. "Most came through the anonymous reports we've been receiving since the Willow Creek case gained media attention." "Have we managed to investigate them all?" asked Arthur, examining the reports spread on the table. "Connie is coordinating the preliminary investigations. We've already identified at least 3 cases that appear to be genuine situations of families separated irregularly." Florence, who had transferred to a school in Ojai to be closer to the foundation's work, added, "And there's something else. I received a call from the district attorney's office of Santa Barbara. They want our help to investigate a similar scheme that may be operating in the metropolitan area." "Similar how?" asked Margaret. "Children being redistributed from closed shelters to families who haven't gone through proper legal processes. Exactly the same pattern we discovered in Willow Creek." The news brought a mixture of satisfaction and concern. Satisfaction because their fight had generated bigger changes. Concern because it meant that the problem was much more extensive than they had imagined. "Where is Isabel today?" asked Arthur, noticing the absence of the girl, who usually spent her afternoons at the foundation after school. "She's at school participating in a project about families," replied Margaret with a smile. "She asked to give a presentation about families that choose each other instead of traditional families." "Does she still draw the birds?" asked Florence. "Every day, but now they're always flying in flocks, never alone." That afternoon, Isabel arrived at the foundation running, carrying a backpack full of drawings and a radiant smile on her face. "Mommy, Uncle Arthur, Aunt Florence, do you want to see my presentation?" She spread her drawings on the reception desk, explaining each one with the enthusiasm of an 8-year-old who had found her voice. "This one shows how a family can have people who weren't born together, but who love each other anyway," she said, pointing to a colorful drawing. "And this one shows how sometimes families get lost, but good people help them find each other again." "And this one?" asked Arthur, indicating a more elaborate drawing. "This one is special. It shows a girl who was very sad, but she found people who helped her become happy again. And now she wants to help other children too." The drawing showed a small figure surrounded by several larger figures, all connected by colored lines that Isabel explained were bonds of love that nobody can break. "Isabel," said Margaret, hugging her daughter, "do you really want to help other children when you grow up?" "I do. I want to be like you. I want to find lost children and help them find their families. And if some children don't have families to go back to, then we help them find new families like you helped me." At that moment, an unexpected visit arrived that would once again change the course of their lives. Connie appeared at the door of the foundation, accompanied by a young woman of about 16 years old, too thin for her age, and with eyes that carried a familiar sadness. "This is Beatrice," said Connie, leading the teenager inside. "She has a story that you need to hear." Beatrice Smith had spent the last 5 years living with a family in Santa Barbara, but recently had discovered that her adoptive parents had no legal documentation about her. Worse yet, she had begun to remember fragments of a previous life, of a mother who may still be alive. "I was almost 11 years old when I was placed with this family," explained Beatrice, her voice trembling slightly. "They said my mother had died in an accident, but yesterday I found this hidden in the attic of the house." She pulled out a yellowed letter, handwritten with uncertain handwriting. "My dear Beatrice, if you are reading this, it means you have managed to grow up despite everything. I am trying to find you, but bad people are stopping me. Never stop believing that I love you and that I will come back to you. Mommy?" The silence in the room was profound. It was the first concrete evidence that the scheme they had discovered in Willow Creek had operated for years in multiple cities. "Beatrice," said Margaret gently, "do you remember your mother's full name?" "Carmen Smith. She worked cleaning houses and always sang while she cooked." Florence exchanged a significant look with Arthur. "We can start an investigation immediately. If your mother is alive, we will find her." "Even after so long?" "Even after so long," confirmed Arthur. "Our foundation exists exactly for that." Isabel, who had listened to the entire conversation attentively, approached Beatrice and held her hand. "My mom was lost too," she said with simplicity. "But these people helped me find her. They'll help you too." That night, when the foundation closed and everyone went home, Margaret and Isabel walked through the quiet streets of Ojai, watching the first stars appear in the sky. "Mommy," said Isabel, "why are there bad people who separate families?" It was a complex question to answer to a child, but Margaret had learned that honesty, adapted to age, was always better than protective lies. "Sometimes, honey, lost people think they can solve their own problems by causing problems for others. And sometimes greedy people do bad things because they think they're going to get something out of it. But why don't they understand that they're hurting children? Because they've lost something very important, the ability to feel empathy, to understand the pain of other people. And can we help them find empathy again?" Isabel's question surprised Margaret with its depth. Sometimes yes, other times no, but what's important is that we can always help the people who have been hurt by them. Like Beatrice? Exactly like Beatrice. When they got home, they found Arthur and Florence waiting for them on the porch, with expressions that mixed joy and worry. "We got a lead on Beatrice's mother," announced Florence. "Carmen Smith is alive and working as a cleaner in a hospital in Santa Barbara. Apparently she has been looking for her daughter for years, but never knew where to start." "That's wonderful," exclaimed Margaret. "It is," agreed Arthur, "but there's something else. During the investigation, we discovered that the scheme we're fighting is much bigger than we thought. It may involve hundreds of children throughout the state." The revelation brought a new dimension to the work they were doing. It was no longer about isolated cases, but about an organized network that had operated for decades. "What does that mean for us?" asked Margaret. "It means our work is just beginning," replied Florence, "and that we're going to need a lot more resources and people to face something of that magnitude." "Then we'll get them," said Isabel, with the determination of a child who had learned that even the most difficult problems can be solved when good people work together. "We'll get them," agreed Arthur, "one family at a time." That night, while Isabel slept peacefully in her room full of drawings of free birds, the three adults who had become a family through adversity planned the next steps of a mission that had begun with a girl crying in a park and now extended throughout the state of California. It was the beginning of a much bigger fight, but they would face it together, strengthened by the love they had discovered for each other and by the certainty that every child deserved the chance to fly free and, above all, to always find the way back home. 2 years after the founding of Freebirds, the organization had become a national reference in the reunification of separated families. What began as a small local initiative now operated in 6 states, with more than 50 volunteers, and a network of lawyers, psychologists, and dedicated social workers. Margaret, now a law graduate and specialist in children's rights, coordinated the legal investigations of the foundation. Her office was full of files of resolved cases, more than 200 families reunited in 3 years of work. "We have a delicate situation," said Mr. Wilson, during a special meeting he had convened at the Foundation's headquarters. The District Attorney's Office has identified an international child trafficking scheme that may be connected to the cases we investigate. International how? Asked Arthur, who had become the official president of the Foundation. Brazilian. Children being sent illegally to families in other countries, especially the United States and Europe, through fraudulent adoptions. Florence, now the Foundation's pedagogical director, leaned forward. And is that connected to the unregulated shelters we discovered? Apparently, yes. Some of the arrested administrators revealed that some of the children weren't redistributed locally, but sent to international clients who paid very high fees. The revelation left everyone in silence. Isabel, now 10 years old and frequently present at the Foundation's meetings, asked the question everyone was thinking. Does that mean that some children have been taken very far away from their families? Unfortunately, yes, replied Mr. Wilson. But it also means that we may have Brazilian families looking for children who are in other countries, and families from other countries looking for children who have been brought illegally here, added Margaret. Exactly. That's why I need your help. The District Attorney's Office wants Freebirds to coordinate the humanitarian aspect of this investigation. It was a huge responsibility, but also an opportunity to further expand the reach of their work. How many children are we talking about? Asked Arthur. Potentially hundreds, maybe thousands, considering that this scheme may have operated for decades. That afternoon, while they processed the implications of this new revelation, they received a visit that demonstrated in practice the international dimension of the problem. Jennifer Thompson was a 45-year-old American who had traveled to Brazil following leads about her adopted daughter, Sarah, who she suspected had been illegally taken from her Brazilian biological family. I adopted Sarah 5 years ago through an agency that presented itself as legitimate, explained Jennifer, visibly emotional. But recently she started having nightmares and speaking words in Portuguese that I didn't teach her. What kind of words? Asked Margaret. Mostly maman and saudade, and she sings a song in Portuguese that she says she learned before. Florence asked Jennifer to call Sarah via video call. When the 8-year-old girl appeared on the screen, she sang a few verses of the song she remembered. My God, whispered Isabel, who was watching. I know that song. It's a nursery rhyme that children sing here in Brazil. Sarah, said Florence gently through the screen, do you remember anything from before living with Mommy Jennifer? The girl hesitated, then nodded shyly. I remember a lady who cried a lot and houses with red tile roofs. And would you like to know more about that time? I would, but I'm afraid of making Mommy Jennifer sad. Jennifer wiped away the tears streaming down her face. Sarah, honey, I would never be sad if you wanted to learn about your first family. I love you, and I will always love you, no matter what we discover. In the following weeks, the investigation into Sarah revealed a complex story. She'd been taken from a favela in Rio de Janeiro, under the claim of abandonment, but her biological mother, Maria Santos, had never abandoned her daughter. She had been deceived by people who presented themselves as social workers and said they would take Sarah to a special educational program. Maria contacted us 3 years ago, said Connie, during a meeting to discuss the case. She never stopped looking for her daughter. She works as a day laborer and saves every penny to hire private detectives. The situation was delicate. Sarah had created genuine bonds with Jennifer, who loved her as a daughter, but she also had the right to know her biological mother, who had never consented to the separation. There is no perfect solution for cases like this, admitted Margaret during a conversation with the team, but there is a fair solution. The solution came in the form of an innovative agreement mediated by the Foundation. Sarah would spend part of the year with Jennifer in the United States, and part of the year with Maria in Brazil, maintaining ties with both families until she was old enough to decide where she wanted to live permanently. "Two mothers," said Isabel when she heard about the decision. "Like I have Mommy Margaret and Aunt Florence." Sarah's case opened the doors to dozens of other international cases. The foundation began to receive contacts from adoptive families from various countries who suspected that their children had been obtained illegally, as well as from Brazilian families looking for children who had disappeared years ago. One of the most touching cases was that of Roberto Smith, a Brazilian businessman who 15 years ago had lost contact with his son after a complicated divorce. The ex-wife had moved to another country with the child, claiming that he no longer wanted to see his son. "I never stopped looking," said Roberto during his first visit to the foundation. "I spent my entire fortune hiring private investigators in various countries." Margaret studied the documentation he had brought. "Mr. Smith, from what I'm seeing here, there were serious irregularities in the court process that authorized your son's move to another country. Can I get him back?" "It depends. Your son is now 15 years old. He may be completely adapted to life abroad. We have to consider what's best for him." The investigation revealed that Roberto's son, now named Michael Peterson, lived in Germany with his mother and a stepfather. He had become an academically successful teenager, but felt an inexplicable emptiness in his life. When the foundation managed to establish contact, the first video call between father and son after 15 years was emotional for everyone present. "Dad," said Michael in hesitant Portuguese, I always knew you existed." "Son," replied Roberto, crying openly, "I never stopped loving you, not one day. Why didn't you ever look for me?" "I did. For 15 years I looked for you every day." The reunion took months to organize, involving judicial authorities from 2 countries. But when it finally happened, at the airport in São Paulo, it was a moment that demonstrated the transformative power of the work the foundation was doing. Isabel, now a veteran of family reunification operations, was present to document the moment. Her drawings had evolved into sophisticated representations of families reuniting, and she had begun to write short stories about each case she followed. "Uncle Arthur," she said after Roberto's reunion with Michael, "how many families have we already helped to find each other?" "More than 300, he replied, watching father and son talking hesitantly, trying to recover 15 lost years. "And how many still need help?" "Thousands, probably, but each family we reunite gives us the strength to continue looking for the others. Even when it's difficult, even when some people don't want families to find each other." "Especially in those moments," said Margaret, joining the conversation, "because that's when we most need to remember why we started this work." Isabel nodded seriously, then returned to watching Roberto and Michael. The teenager had decided to spend his vacation in Brazil, getting to know the paternal family he had never known. It would be a long process of reconnection, but it was a beginning. "Mommy," said Isabel that night, while drawing more birds in her notebook, now flying between continents, connecting people separated by oceans. "I think, when I grow up, I want to work helping children like Sarah and Michael. And what would you like to do specifically?" "I want to learn several languages so I can talk to children from all countries, and I want to draw stories about families that reunite so other children know that there's always hope." Margaret hugged her daughter, thinking about how a girl who had gone through so much suffering had transformed into someone dedicated to alleviating the suffering of others. "You know you can do anything you want, don't you?" "I know, but I want to do this because it's important and because you taught me that when we receive love, we have to pass that love on." It was a simple but profound lesson, and it was exactly That philosophy that had transformed a personal tragedy into a mission that had already changed hundreds of lives and would continue to change many more. 5 years after the creation of the Free Birds Foundation, Isabel had become an extraordinary 13-year-old teenager. Fluent in 3 languages and with an understanding of human nature that surprised adults, she had developed a special talent for connecting with traumatized children who arrived at the foundation. Little Elena doesn't want to talk to any of the adults, said Connie during a morning meeting. She only agrees to be near Isabel. Elena was a 7-year-old girl who had been brought by her grandparents after discovering that she was being kept illegally by a family that had adopted her without proper documentation. The child was clearly traumatized and refused to trust anyone older than her. "Leave it to me," said Isabel, already demonstrating the confidence of someone who had grown up surrounded by stories of overcoming. "I'm going to draw with her. Sometimes it's easier to draw feelings than to talk about them." Margaret watched her daughter head to the room where Elena was hiding under a table, hugging a worn teddy bear. At 38, Margaret had become one of the most respected lawyers in the country in the area of children's rights, but she was still moved to see how her daughter had transformed her own trauma into a tool to help others. "She has a natural gift," commented Florence, now Director of Program Development for the Foundation. "Sometimes I think she went through all that so she could help other children in a way that we adults could never do." "It's a beautiful way to see it," replied Arthur, who at 57 had sold all his businesses to dedicate himself fully to the foundation, transforming pain into purpose. Through the glass door, they could see Isabel sitting on the floor next to Elena, drawing silently. Little by little, the smaller girl came out from under the table and approached, curious about the colorful drawings that Isabel was creating. "Do you want to know what I'm drawing?" asked Isabel softly. Elena nodded shyly. "It's a girl who was lost, but she found people who wanted to help her find her real family. See these birds here? They're flying to get news from her family." "And do they find them?" asked Elena, her first word since she had arrived. "They always find them. Sometimes it takes a little while, but they always find them." "Even when the girl was with bad people?" "Especially when she was with bad people, because then the birds fly faster to get her out of there." Elena sat down next to Isabel. "Can I draw too?" "Sure. How about we draw together?" 2 hours later, Elena had told her whole story through drawings. How she had been separated from her grandparents when she was little. How the people who took care of her made her work cleaning the house. How she missed a lady who called her "my little granddaughter" and made carrot cakes. "The carrot cakes are special," explained Elena. "Grandma said it was our family's secret recipe." Isabel smiled. "You know what? My Aunt Florence makes delicious cakes. Do you want her to teach you how to make carrot cakes while we look for your grandma?" "Are you really going to look for her?" "We are. That's what we do here. We help families find each other." That afternoon, while Florence was teaching Elena how to make cakes in the foundation's kitchen, Margaret and her team had already located the girl's grandmother. Mrs. Connie Smith, 71, had spent 3 years desperately looking for her granddaughter, spending her savings on private investigators and making posters with Elena's photo. "Is she alive? Is my granddaughter okay?" asked Mrs. Connie over the phone, her voice choked with emotion. "She's alive and she's here with us," replied Margaret, "and she remembers your carrot cakes." The reunion happened the next day. When Elena saw her grandmother enter the foundation's room, she ran into her arms screaming, "Grandma!" in a scene that made everyone present cry with joy. "My little granddaughter, you've grown so much," said Mrs. Connie, hugging Elena as if she would never let her go again. "Grandma, I didn't forget the cake recipe. Aunt Florence helped me remember it exactly." "Then we'll make cakes together every day, my love." It was one more family reunited, one more story of suffering transformed into joy. But that same day, news arrived at the foundation that would change everything once again. Mr. Wilson appeared without warning, bringing documents that he insisted on showing personally. "We have received information about a case that may be of particular interest to you," he said, spreading papers on the table. "It's about Valerie Macmillan." Valerie had been sentenced to 15 years in prison for her participation in the scheme to separate families, but apparently had decided to collaborate with the authorities in exchange for a reduced sentence. She revealed information about other similar schemes that are still in operation, continued Mr. Wilson, and she specifically mentioned that there are hidden records about all the children who were illegally redistributed over the years. "What kind of records?" asked Arthur. "Lists with the children's real names, information about their biological families, current location of many of them." Apparently, the scheme's operators kept detailed documentation as a form of insurance in case they needed to negotiate with the authorities. "And where are these records?" "Valerie said they are hidden in an abandoned house on the outskirts of Willow Creek. She drew a map for the authorities." The prospect of finding information about hundreds of separated families was exciting, but also frightening. It meant that the problem was even bigger than they had calculated. "When are we going to get these documents?" asked Margaret. "The operation is scheduled for tomorrow, and I want you to be present. These records will need to be analyzed by people who understand the stories behind the numbers." That night, the extended family gathered in the house that Margaret and Isabel shared with Arthur and Florence. They had become an unconventional family unit, but deeply united by the bonds forged in adversity. "Tomorrow may be the most important day in the history of our foundation," said Arthur during dinner. "Why?" asked Isabel. "Because we may find information that allows us to reunite hundreds of families at once." "That's good, isn't it?" "It's very good," replied Margaret, "but it also means a lot of work ahead, and a lot of suffering to be healed," added Florence. Isabel was thoughtful for a moment. "Do you know what the most beautiful part of our work is?" "What?" asked the three adults almost simultaneously. "It's seeing the exact moment when a person realizes they're not alone in the world anymore, when they realize they have a family that loves them." "What was it like for you when you found your mom again?" "It was as if I had been holding my breath for years and could finally breathe again." That night, Isabel wrote in her diary, a habit she had developed to process all the stories she followed at the foundation. "Tomorrow may be the day we find the keys to open hundreds of cages where families are trapped by separation. I'm nervous, but also excited. Each family we reunite reminds me of how important it is never to give up. Even when it seems impossible, there is always a way to come home." The next morning, when they set out for the operation in Willow Creek, none of them imagined that they would find much more than hidden documents. They would find the final piece of the puzzle that had begun with a girl crying in a park, holding corn kernels and dreaming of free birds. The circle was about to close, but in a way that none of them could have foreseen. The abandoned house on the outskirts of Willow Creek was exactly where Valerie had indicated on the map. It was an old construction, with a red tile roof and peeling walls, hidden on a small dirt road surrounded by eucalyptus trees. When the team from the district attorney's office arrived, accompanied by Margaret, Arthur, Florence, and Isabel, the silence of the place contrasted dramatically with the importance of what they were about to discover. "The documents are supposedly hidden in a secret compartment in the basement," explained Mr. Wilson as the technical team prepared equipment for the search. Isabel, now a veteran of the Foundation's operations, watched everything with special attention. Something about that place seemed familiar to her, although she was sure she had never been there before. "Mommy," she whispered to Margaret, "this house, it reminds me of something." "Reminds you of what, honey?" "I can't explain. It's like I've already dreamed about it." When they entered the house, the smell of mold and abandonment was overwhelming. Furniture covered by dusty sheets occupied the main room, and there were signs that the place had been left in a hurry. Years ago, in the basement, after 2 hours of careful searching, the technical team found what they were looking for: a false wall that hid a small safe full of documents, photographs, and detailed files on hundreds of children. "My God," murmured Margaret as she examined the first documents. "It's a complete list. Names, ages, families of origin, current location. Everything is here." Mr. Wilson held a specific folder that had caught his attention. "You need to see this," he said, his voice tense. The folder contained documents about Isabel, but not only about the period when she had lived with Mr. Barnaby. There were records dating back to her birth, including photographs of her as a baby and detailed notes about her family. "This house," said Mr. Wilson slowly, "wasn't just a document storage location. It was the center of operations for the entire scheme." Florence examined the old photographs scattered on a dusty table. Suddenly she stopped, holding a specific photo with trembling hands. "Margaret," she called, her voice almost inaudible, "you need to see this." The photograph showed a young woman holding a baby in front of the same house where they were now. On the back, it was written, "Margaret Sanders and daughter Isabel, 6 months old, Santa Clara Transition Home." "Transition home?" questioned Arthur. "This house was an institution." Mr. Wilson examined other documents from the safe. Apparently, yes. The Santa Clara Transition Home operated here for over 20 years, receiving single mothers in vulnerable situations. But from the documents I'm seeing, it wasn't exactly what it appeared to be. Margaret sat down in an old chair, processing the revelation. "I remember this house," she said finally. "I came here when I was pregnant with Isabel. They said it was a safe place for mothers who needed help." "What happened here, Mommy?" asked Isabel, approaching. I was having a lot of problems. At that time, no place to live, no money, using drugs. Someone told me there was a lady here who helped mothers like me." "And did she help?" "I thought so. Mrs. Baker, the woman who ran this place, took me in when I was pregnant with you. She gave me a place to stay, food, medical care." "Then why did we leave here?" Margaret looked around the house, the memories returning slowly. "Because when you were born, Mrs. Baker started saying that I wasn't in a position to take care of you, that it would be better to give you to a suitable family that she knew." Mr. Wilson found more documents related to the case. According to these records, the Santa Clara Transition Home was a facade. They welcomed vulnerable mothers, waited for them to give birth, then pressured or coerced these mothers to give their babies up for irregular adoption. "And when the mothers refused?" asked Arthur. "They were threatened, intimidated, or, in extreme cases, their children were removed under false allegations of neglect." Isabel was examining other photographs when she found something that made her freeze. "Guys," she said, her voice trembling, "look at this." It was a group photograph showing several young women with babies, all in front of the house. Among them was clearly Margaret, but there were other faces that Isabel recognized. "This woman here," she said, pointing to a young blonde woman, "is Beatrice, the girl we found 2 years ago." Florence examined the photo more closely. "It's not Beatrice. It's an adult woman holding a baby who looks like Beatrice." Mr. Wilson consulted the documents. "Carmen Smith," he read, mother of Beatrice Smith, was at the transition home in 2007. The revelation left everyone in silence. Beatrice had not only been a victim of the same scheme as Isabel, their mothers had been in the same place at the same time. "How many families were destroyed here?" asked Margaret, looking around the house with a mixture of sadness and anger. "According to these documents," replied Mr. Wilson, "more than 500 children passed through this scheme over 20 years. 500 families separated." whispered Florence. But also 500 opportunities for reunification, said Isabel, always focusing on the positive side. Now we have all the information we need to help them. That afternoon, after the technical team finished cataloguing all the documents, found the extended family remained in the house for a few more minutes. There was something cathartic about being at the place where it all had started, where Isabel had been born, and from where her journey of suffering and overcoming had departed. "You know what's most ironic?" said Margaret, watching the abandoned garden in front of the house. "If I hadn't come here, Isabel would never have been born. And if she hadn't gone through everything she went through, our foundation would never have existed. And hundreds of other families would never have reunited," added Arthur. "It's like the universe had a plan," reflected Florence, "to transform something terrible into something beautiful." Isabel approached an old tree in the yard where there was still a rope swing hanging. "Could I have played here when I was a baby?" "It's possible," replied Margaret. "We stayed here until you turned 1. "Then this place is part of my story, of the beginning of my story." "Of the beginning of our story," corrected Arthur. When they finally left the house, taking with them the documentation that would change hundreds of lives, Isabel looked back one last time. "Are we going to transform this house into something good?" she asked. "What do you have in mind?" asked Margaret. "We could renovate it and turn it into a temporary shelter for families who are reuniting, a place where mothers and children can stay together while they get to know each other again after years apart." The idea was perfect, to transform the place where so many families had been separated into a place of healing and reunification. 6 months later, the Santa Clara Reunion House was fully functioning. The building had been completely renovated, with cozy rooms, a community kitchen, and gardens full of colorful flowers. Most importantly, it was full of stories of hope. At the opening ceremony, hundreds of families who had been reunited through the work of the Free Birds Foundation were present. Beatrice, now 18 and a college student, had come with her mother, Carmen. Roberto was there with his son, Michael, who had decided to study in Brazil. Elena played in the garden with her grandmother, Connie. 10 years ago," said Arthur during his inaugural speech, "a 6-year-old girl was sitting in a park, holding corn kernels and dreaming of free birds. Today, that girl has become an extraordinary young woman who has dedicated her life to freeing other families from the invisible cages that kept them apart." Isabel, now 16 and about to enter university to study psychology and human rights, stepped up to the microphone to give her own speech. "I learned that pain can be transformed into purpose," she said, her voice clear and confident. "That suffering can become wisdom, and that when we reach out to help someone who is falling, we also become stronger." She looked at the audience, seeing hundreds of faces that represented stories of overcoming and triumphant love. "We have all been birds trapped in cages, but we discovered that the cages only exist in our minds. When we learn to fly together, we discover that the sky is infinite and that there is always, always a way back home." When the ceremony ended and the families spread through the gardens of the renovated house, Margaret, Arthur, Florence, and Isabel sat on the same bench, where years ago a traumatized girl had hidden from the violence. "Do you think we did it?" asked Isabel. "Make a difference?" "Look around," replied Margaret, watching the dozens of happy families playing in the garden. "What do you think?" Isabel smiled, watching a small child chase colorful butterflies, while her parents watched her with tears of joy in their eyes, a family that had been reunited only 2 weeks before, after 5 years apart. "I think we managed to transform pain into love," she said, "and that's the most important thing anyone can do in life." At that moment, a group of birds took flight from the old tree in the garden, flying in harmonious circles before heading towards the horizon. They were free to go wherever they wanted, but they knew exactly where their home was. Like the families who had learned that no matter how far they fly, love always shows the way back home.